Chapter 906. It was not the first time for Li Tianlan to come to Tiannan. But it was the first time for him to come to Xianyuan City. The helicopter that took off from Yuzhou flew all the way over Nanyun, Ningbian where the Freedom Corps was located, and went straight into Xianyuan City. This city was named by Li Tianlan, but it had been developing rapidly for 2 years outside of his sight. The rotors of the helicopter roared and rotated in the air. Standing in front of the cabin and looking down, Li Tianlan could clearly see the basically completed city center, the construction of several other districts, and the demolition of almost the entire city. Construction companies from all over Zhongzhou state were working hard, and all kinds of construction equipment covered the whole field of vision. Li Tianlan looked at it quietly. His deep and serene pupils shone with a strange brilliance. "I like it here." Qin Weibai leaned against Li Tianlan and said with a soft smile. Such a Xianyuan city was like a piece of white paper. Every construction company, every construction machine, every transport vehicle, and every worker was the brush and ink on the white paper. Everyone and all their efforts were trying to draw the most perfect pattern on this white paper. The current Xianyuan city could not be said to be beautiful. Its downtown area might be luxurious enough, but compared with the ruins in most areas, this kind of luxury was extremely abrupt. But this kind of city that was changing every day was enough to make people feel relaxed and happy. The sunlight shone through the cabin on Qin Weibai. She gently held Li Tianlan's arm, and there was unconcealable longing and happiness on her perfect and flawless face. Li Tianlan looked at the city below quietly. After a long time, he nodded seriously. "How do you feel?" Bai Qingzhao, who came to Xianyuan City with Li Tianlan, asked with a smile. It was not the first time for him to come to Xianyuan City. He was the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, and one of the most important tasks was to grasp the detailed movements of the Tiannan Freedom Corps. The headquarters of the Freedom Corps was in Ningbian. In the past 2 years, Bai Qingzhao would come here almost every month, and he would also come to Xianyuan City to take a look. It was no exaggeration to say that every change in Xianyuan City was under his sight and attention. Li Tianlan was quiet for a moment and whispered, "I'm overwhelmed with emotions." Only these words could clearly express his feelings at this time. This was the first time for him to see his own city, his own country. The glorious future that countless people had been looking forward to was no longer an illusion. Instead, it had become incomparably real here. It was not until this moment that Li Tianlan truly felt the power. It didn't belong to martial arts, but it was his power. It was a power that could carry him to the peak. This place will definitely become the most beautiful city in Zhongzhou State in the future, just like Xingzhou City before. It's a product of a special background. It's hard to replicate and can't be replicated. Bai Qingzhao sighed with emotion. Emperor Dong's palace is now worthy of Xianyuan City, and Xianyuan City is also worthy of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan looked into the distance. In the distance, there was a sparkling pool of water. Looking down from the sky, Xianyuan City was almost divided into 2 parts by an artificial lake, which was not very vast but had a great atmosphere. Numerous uniquely shaped arch bridges connected the 2 sides of the artificial lake. The lake water was flowing gently, surrounding a mountain-like castle. The surroundings of the castle were oppressive and quiet, and it revealed an indescribable solemnity. Li Tianlan fell silent. Qin Weibai and Bai Qingzhao also fell silent. Surrounded by the lake, Emperor Dong's palace was like an island in Xianyuan City. At this moment, countless people on the island stood around the castle. The simple and heavy black and white color covered the bright flowers and green grass around the castle. White banners fluttered around the island. The area on the left behind the castle had been separated and turned into a huge mourning hall. Everyone in Emperor Dong's palace stood outside the castle, waiting for something silently. Li Tianlan pressed his lips tightly, and his eyes were deep and firm. The reason why he gave Huinan was also because of this matter. More than 1,000 soldiers of the Nightmare Troop who died in the desert would be buried tomorrow. As the palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan had to be here. Nothing was more important than this matter. The helicopter landed slowly on the tarmac of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan took Qin Weibai's hand and walked out of the cabin. His expression was calm and steady. In his sight were the members of Emperor Dong's palace, dressed in black formal suits with white armbands on their arms. The senior members of Emperor Dong's palace he was familiar with were all gathered together. Most of them were people Li Tianlan found familiar or had never seen before. But they were all members of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. Before he could say anything, in his sight, the dense crowd bowed slightly at the same time and said in a uniform voice, "Welcome back, Your Majesty." The neat and loud voice echoed over Emperor Dong's palace, and the sound waves were extremely intense. "Your Majesty. Welcome back, Your Majesty." Li Tianlan subconsciously straightened his body. He looked deeply at the crowd around him and didn't speak for a long time. 2 years in the desert prison. Emperor Dong's palace grew from nothing. Xianyuan city grew from nothing. Li Tianlan had too many things to do. For example, to meet the new high-level and quasi-high-level figures of Emperor Dong's palace in the past 2 years. To meet the chief administrator and chief judge of Xianyuan city. For example, to let everyone in Emperor Dong's palace understand the purpose of Bai Qingzhao's visit, many things. But he did none of them. Under everyone's gaze, he nodded slowly and said calmly, "Go to the morning hall." His voice rang in the ears of every member of Emperor Dong's palace. The crowd automatically parted. Ning Qiancheng, the first mayor of Xianyuan city, came over and said softly, "I'll take you there." Li Tianlan shook his head, pointed to Bai Qingzhao beside him, and said slowly, "Qiancheng, this is Secretary General Bai of the Army Headquarters. On behalf of the Army Headquarters and Minister Dongcheng, I'm here to express my condolences to the families of the martyrs. Arrange for the Secretary General to meet the families of the martyrs first. Don't be afraid of trouble, this is something that must be done. Take me to the morning hall during the day and I'll be there soon. Do the families of the martyrs have any requests? Zhongzhou State will give them some compensation, but Emperor Dong's palace also needs to give them enough compensation and pension." Ning Qiancheng nodded and then shook his head. The families didn't make any requests. Li Tianlan was silent. What was the use of making requests? They were all gone. But they were all gone. If they didn't want compensation, what else could they ask for? He took a deep breath and patted Ning Qiancheng on the shoulder. "You go with the Secretary General first, I'll come later." Ning Qiancheng nodded and shook hands with Bai Qingzhao solemnly. Li Beidian, who was a little weak but still in good spirits, came to Li Tianlan and said in a low voice, "The morning hall is behind the castle. The location of the cemetery was decided 2 years ago. We used this artificial lake and circled a small island not far from the castle. There is enough space. In the future, the graves of Senior Li and the seniors of the Li family can also be moved here. I mentioned this to you when you were in the desert, and I'm waiting for your decision." Li Tianlan nodded and suddenly said, "Why do we circle an island? There are many places near the castle." The corner of Li Baitian's mouth moved as if he wanted to explain something. Finally, he shook his head and said softly, "We've invited a feng shui master. The location of the cemetery is the best in terms of feng shui." Li Tianlan was silent for a while and nodded. He took Qin Weibai's hand and said softly, "Let's go and have a look. I was supposed to write a big chapter today. I had a stiff neck last night and it hurts so much. I'll see how I feel tomorrow. If it doesn't hurt, I'll write a big chapter." Chapter 907. The sun was setting. After dinner, Huang Tong walked quietly on the huge and empty training ground, looking around with empty eyes. There were still a few soldiers training on the training ground, and they all looked listless. Not far away, 2 companies were gathering, but their slogans were weak. Huang Tong watched all this quietly, and his eyes became more and more empty. The news has spread, and now the response from the middle and grassroots is very strong. "General, I can't control the situation in the regiment. If possible, I hope the higher-ups can give me some support. A tall middle-aged man in his 40s followed Huang Tong carefully, and his voice was a little bitter. Huang Tong walked forward silently, like a walking corpse, and did not speak for a long time. He was now at the encampment of an infantry regiment in the Beijiang military region. The regiment commander was a middle-level officer he valued very much. He was capable and educated. If there were no accidents, Huang Tong intended to promote him to a higher level. In a situation where the entire northern borderline was in a state of panic, Huang Tong had high hopes for this regiment, the regiment leader. Therefore, the first stop of his inspection was here. In fact, it proved that this infantry regiment codenamed War Tiger still maintained a certain military atmosphere. At least one or two figures could be seen on the training ground occasionally. Compared to other places, this was already good. In one day. To be exact, in the past less than 12 hours, the order of the Beijiang Corps had completely collapsed. The Desert War had ended for nearly 2 days. In the past day, the morale of the generals and soldiers in Beijiang was low. What completely collapsed the order of the entire corps was a piece of news. Bai Qingzhao, the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, went to Tiannan with Li Tianlan, the Palace Lord of Emperor Dong's palace. They went to pay their respects to the victims and the families of the victims. This was the attitude of the Army Headquarters. The moment the Beijiang Corps received the news, it completely collapsed. The Desert War was the war between the Corps and Emperor Dong's palace. Many people died in Emperor Dong's palace. But even more people died in the Corps. Such large-scale casualties were extremely rare since the founding of the People's Republic. Under normal circumstances, as soon as the war ended, they should be able to see the big shots from Yuzhou and hear their promises. Then what awaited them was the mourning of the whole country. They should be heroes remembered by Zhongzhou State. This was inevitable, and there would be no exceptions. But the so-called inevitable did not happen. Until the end of the war, Zhongzhou State had no attitude at all. They seemed to have completely forgotten about the Northern Border Army. A large number of corpses were left in the desert. Zhongzhou State didn't care about it. There was no comfort and promise from the big shots, and there was no mourning. Not to mention it in the news, there was no reason for it to exist. And the most representative of Dongqing Wudi in the army headquarters had gone to Tiannan. The corpses that had not been cleaned up in the desert seemed to have died just like that, without any explanation. There was not even any news about the pension that would soon be paid. The entire northern border army was dead silent. Compared to blaming Zhongzhou State, the endless resentment was all concentrated on Huang Tong, the head of the Beijiang army. Without any orders from the military headquarters, he insisted on mobilizing most of the northern frontier army's combat power. It was clearly a war, but the situation reported to the military headquarters was a drill. During the critical period, he even cut off the army's contact with the outside world. All of this showed that the war was Huang Tong's personal decision. At least it was not recognized by Zhongzhou State on the surface. It was all Huang Tong's fault that the bigwigs of Zhongzhou State did not come. Everyone could see this. Therefore, when Zhongzhou State turned a deaf ear to everything here, the ordinary soldiers and the middle and grassroots officers of the army were extremely disappointed with Huang Tong. The ordinary soldiers stopped training. The grassroots officers didn't care. The order of the army was issued to the middle-level officers. The middle-level officers just made a phone call to deal with it, and then reported to their superiors that they couldn't handle it. In various companies and regiments, countless soldiers' applications for reinstatement increased wildly. Some middle-level and high-level officers had already submitted their transfer applications. They could be transferred anywhere as long as they were not under Huang Tong's command. The higher-ups of the army were gloomy, and the deputy of the army distanced himself from Huang Tong as soon as possible. All kinds of reports flew to the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State like snowflakes. The order had been completely out of control. Huang Tong wanted to interfere, but he was powerless to do so. From the standpoint of the army headquarters, what Huang Tong did was completely treason. But after getting Qin Fangqing's support, the war he started was hard to define. But Dongqing Wudi was not without a temper. For what Huang Tong had done, it was good enough that he was not arrested on the spot after the war. It was simply a pipe dream to ask the army headquarters to pay for what Huang Tong had done. For Huang Tong, this was really the end of the road. Now his only hope was Qin Fangqing. Although he knew that Qin Fangqing's situation was not much better, Huang Tong had no other backers. I will communicate with the army headquarters. Huang Tong said slowly, hold on for a few more days. I will definitely give you an explanation about Beijiang. The regimental commander nodded with a bitter face and said helplessly, I'll try my best, but... General, this matter needs to be done as soon as possible, especially in terms of pension. If it is not in place for a long time, the families will not agree. Zhongzhou State had always been the fastest in terms of pension. In most cases, the notice and pension were basically in place at the same time. If this point was not implemented as soon as possible, it was very likely to cause a worse impact. The corner of Huang Tong's mouth twitched slightly. He nodded expressionlessly and said, I see. He walked slowly to his car and said flatly, you do more work and put more effort into the affairs of the regiment. Leave the pension to me. The regimental commander nodded and said respectfully, I understand. Huang Tong nodded, opened the door and got into the car. The car started slowly and left the Fighting Tiger Regiment. The phone rang in the silent car. Huang Tong took out his phone and glanced at it blankly. It was his secretary. He frowned slightly, pressed the answer button, and said in a low voice, what's the matter? General, on the other end of the phone, the secretary, who had been with Huang Tong for several years, said with trepidation, the army headquarters, there is news from the army headquarters, it's... Huang Tong's heart tightened slightly. He narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, what news? The army headquarters, the secretary took a deep breath and said, the army headquarters, Minister Dongqing sent a document. Huang Tong could clearly feel the secretary's embarrassment and fear. He frowned tightly and waited patiently. Minister Dongqing approved the maneuver plan of the Beijiang Corps. Maneuver plan. Before the Desert War, the reason Huang Tong reported to the army headquarters was that the Beijiang Corps was going to conduct a maneuver in the desert. No one believed this reason. But it was at least a reason. And this bullshit reason. Dongqing Wudi approved it. Huang Tong gritted his teeth, his face twisted and ferocious. He could understand what Dongqing Wudi meant. Dongqing Wudi approved the maneuver of the Beijiang military region. He also casually defined the Desert War as a maneuver. So in the eyes of the army headquarters, everything that happened in the Desert War and the loss of the Beijiang Corps, none of this happened at all. Naturally, there was no clear statement, let alone the so-called pension. Because it was just a maneuver. Huang Tong gritted his teeth. He thought of Bai Qingzhao, who followed Li Tianlan to Tiannan, of everything in the Beijiang Corps, of his situation and his next fate. The corner of his mouth moved. Puff! A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth and sprayed into the carriage. General! The driver was startled. As the steering wheel tilted, the black car suddenly shook on the street. It's okay. Huang Tong slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His face was pale, and he said gloomily, drive. He silently hung up the phone and kept muttering to himself, Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi. The phone rang again. Huang Tong, who was desperate, slowly lowered his head and looked at the phone screen. He was slightly stunned and subconsciously narrowed his eyes. On the phone screen was not a phone number, but a name recorded in the address book. Jiang Shan. Chapter 908. Strictly speaking, the relationship between Huang Tong and Jiang Shan was very ordinary. One of them was the chairman of Beijiang, and the other was the commander of the Beijiang Corps. Although they met a lot on weekdays, they basically maintained a superficial harmony. Jiang Shan was a senior counselor in Zhongzhou State. To some extent, he could be regarded as one of the leaders of the Prince Group. But as his old leader gradually left the senior management of the Prince Group, his position also changed subtly. Of course, in the general direction, Jiang Shan could often be in line with the group. But in many cases, some of Jiang Shan's actions seemed to indicate that he had some other ideas. In the Prince Group, Jiang Shan, the counselor, seemed to always maintain a vague boundary with other leaders. This boundary gradually became a barrier, and the barrier gradually expanded, and finally reached its peak a few years ago. In the last election, the Prince Group originally wanted to promote Jiang Shan to become a director of Zhongzhou State. That meant that he would become the flag figure of the Prince Group and cooperate with Chen Fangqing to control the future direction of the Prince Group. From counselor to director, the promotion might be the pursuit of most counselors. Although there was a barrier between Jiang Shan and the Prince Group, they could barely maintain the same general direction. Moreover, after he became a director, Chen Fangqing would keep an eye on him, so there would be no big trouble. Once Jiang Shan became a director, he would inevitably leave Beijiang, and the Prince Group could take advantage of the situation to firmly hold Beijiang in the hands of trustworthy people. Jiang Shan worked as a director for one term and retired honorably, which was a happy ending for everyone. However, Jiang Shan refused the proposal of the Prince Group, and it was a very clear refusal, leaving no room for negotiation. He did not choose to become a director to promote his rank, but continued to stay in Beijiang. In order to resist the internal pressure of the Prince Group, Jiang Shan made a lot of big moves in Beijiang. Two directors of Beijiang, who could be said to be the confidants of the Prince Group, were directly removed. The system of Beijiang was constantly changing, and Jiang Shan, who did not hide anything, directly widened the gap. In a short time, with his prestige, Beijiang almost became his private kingdom, and it was tightly managed. As a last resort, the Prince Group could only continue to let Guo Wentian take the position of director, and at the same time, find a way to take over Jiang Shan. Jiang Shan was also working. At first, he wanted to unite with the Wang family of Beihai by marriage and let Jiang Shanyu marry Wang Yuetong. If Wang Yuetong married Jiang Shanyu, it could be said to be a real marriage of lower status. But if he used Beijiang and a counselor as bargaining chips, it was not unacceptable. Jiang Shan had enough confidence to propose marriage, but Wang Tianzong refused his proposal. In desperation, Jiang Shan could only retreat and began to flirt with the Special Warfare Group. Gu Xingyun was naturally very welcoming of Jiang Shan. The Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group had also gradually drifted apart in recent years. There would be no psychological burden for him to accept Jiang Shan. After Gu Xingyun vaguely expressed his support for Jiang Shan finally became stable in Beijiang. His current situation was a bit delicate. Although he was still a member of the Prince Group, he also had the support of the Special Warfare Group. When they did not have absolute confidence to take him down, the Prince Group was not very willing to touch him, but no one would really treat him as one of their own. In this situation, the relationship between Huang Tong and Jiang Shan was naturally not good. Every time they met or talked, Huang Tong always maintained a certain degree of vigilance and defense. The phone kept ringing. Huang Tong looked down at his phone and hesitated for a moment before pressing the answer button. He somewhat despised Jiang Shan's slippery ways, but he would not deny the other party's upbringing. At the very least, he was sure that Jiang Shan didn't call to mock him. "Chairman, I'm Huang Tong." The call connected, and Huang Tong's indifferent voice sounded from the back seat of the car. On the other end of the line, Jiang Shan chuckled. "Old Huang, Secretary General Bai has gone to Tiannan. Have you received the news?" Huang Tong's face darkened as he gritted his teeth and snorted. "You're in a very bad situation right now. I don't need to say more. I'm sure you know that yourself." Jiang Shan's voice was calm. "What are you trying to say?" Huang Tong frowned, his tone cold. "The Northern Borderline Army cannot go out of control. I am the Northern Borderline's chairman. I am responsible for everything that happens in the Northern Borderline, including the Northern Borderline Army," Jiang Shanping said indifferently. Huang Tong pondered for a moment, and a sneer gradually appeared on the corner of his mouth. If there was no reasonable solution for the tens of thousands of dead in the Beijiang army, the whole Beijiang would fall into chaos. The families of the tens of thousands of dead would gather in Beijiang, which would even lead to a series of huge social problems. As the speaker of Beijiang, Jiang Shan could hardly absolve himself from the blame. Once that happened, Huang Tong was bound to fall. But he was only a lieutenant general and his weight was far from enough. The prince group would inevitably take advantage of this opportunity to take over Jiang Shan and replace him with a real member of their own. Therefore, Jiang Shan's phone call seemed to explain his attitude. He was afraid. Huang Tong suddenly relaxed and seemed to find some comfort in his heart. His laughter was a little sarcastic. No one is willing to let the Beijiang army go out of control. I am the first person responsible for this matter. It's not good for me if the army goes out of control. But what can I do now? I just received a notice from the army headquarters. The army headquarters has agreed to the maneuver of the Beijiang military region in the desert, and then? And then there's no then. What can I do? If the pension problem of tens of thousands of people can't be solved, the Beijiang army will exist in name only. The army headquarters, the army headquarters. His voice became louder and louder, and finally turned into a roar to vent his anger. But in the end, his voice gradually lowered, becoming resentful and desperate. You reported the maneuver to the army headquarters, and the army headquarters gave you a clear response. There's no problem in any aspect. Jiang Shan said slowly. But the actual situation is not like this. Huang Tong growled in a low voice and said in a suppressed voice, I don't believe that the army headquarters will ignore the Beijiang army. The life and death of tens of thousands of people is a huge social problem. They can't ignore it. I'm afraid, you're afraid, but isn't Dongchen Wudi afraid? Is it possible? Impossible. Jiang Shan said lightly, in the end, the army headquarters will definitely intervene in this matter, and the pension will be issued, but that will be after you are completely torn apart by the soldiers of the Beijiang army and the families of the deceased, and after the prince group has suffered a major blow. Old Huang, there is no hope for you. Losing your reputation is a light punishment. In the current situation, before the army headquarters intervenes, your only end is to die without a burial place. Huang Tong gritted his teeth. His face was a little pale, and there was obvious fear in his eyes. The most frightening thing was often the truth. He knew that what Jiang Shan said was true. He couldn't refute the truth at all. Do you want to live? Feeling Huang Tong's silence, Jiang Shan suddenly laughed. His laughter was extremely low, with an indescribable temptation. Take your family and go far away. Live a good life. Take your family away and live a good life, you can get a sum of money that you can't spend in this life. Take the money and your family away before you are smashed into pieces. How about that? Huang Tong suddenly shivered. At this moment, listening to Jiang Shan's voice, he suddenly felt a little numb. What do you mean? It's very simple. Old Huang, it's your best chance to get out now. I can provide you with a sum of money, 9 figures, which is enough for you to squander for a lifetime. You can take your family abroad, Italos, East Island, or South America. You can choose. I'll arrange it, as long as you let go of everything in the Beijiang army. In fact, the Beijiang army doesn't belong to you anymore, does it? Then what do I need to pay? Huang Tong forced himself to calm down, but he couldn't calm down no matter how hard he tried. You hardly need to pay anything. Jiang Shan's laughter became deeper and deeper. As long as you listen to me completely, I can give you everything I just promised. Huang Tong held the phone stiffly and was silent for a long time. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said in a dry voice, You want the whole Beijiang? On the other end of the phone, Jiang Shan laughed. He suddenly thought of what Jiang Shanyu said on the phone with his son a few hours ago. He said the original words, Li Tianlan can get the whole Tiannan. Why can't we get Beijiang? Chapter 909. Jiang Shan's voice was very calm. That was the determination of seizing the opportunity and making up his mind after enduring for a long time. It was a kind of majestic power that Huang Tong could completely feel. Li Tianlan could get Tiannan. Why can't we get Beijiang? Huang Tong's brain was buzzing. He carefully tasted this sentence and said in a hoarse voice, "You? I can't arrange so many things alone, especially the life of you and your family abroad in the future." Jiang Shan said faintly. 9 figures of money, the life of a rich man in East Island, Italos, South America, all these meant that Jiang Shan had a lot of available resources in his hands. Whether these resources were his or not, he could use them and made a promise, which was enough to explain a lot of problems. Huang Tong's breathing was a little short. "I don't understand. What are you still hesitating about?" Jiang Shan's voice was very indifferent. But every word he said and every word was with the taste of naked ambition in Huang Tong's ears. The kind of wild ambition that was no longer hidden and completely exposed. "What do I need to do?" Huang Tong shook his head fiercely and said in a deep voice. As Jiang Shan said, he really had nothing to hesitate about. He was already at the end of his rope and had no choice. He would either die or spend the rest of his life in the desert prison. After offending Li Tianlan, his own family was doomed to be extremely miserable, and Lin Yuxian had already said that he would kill his whole family within a week. What else could he hesitate about? The hope that Chen Fengqin gave him was indeed too small, so small that it could be ignored. "First of all, you have to cooperate with Shaoqing." Jiang Shan's voice was a little hoarse, with a touch of faint joy. "Shaoqing?" Huang Tong was stunned and frowned. "Yang Shaoqing?" Jiang Shan said faintly. Huang Tong took a deep breath and smiled self-mockingly. Yang Shaoqing was the Northern Borderline Legion's deputy legion commander. He was Huang Tong's main assistant, but among the 3 deputy legion commanders, he was ranked last. His ability was also extremely average, and he was in charge of unimportant tasks such as logistics and health. But no matter what, Yang Shaoqing was indeed the main leader of the Northern Borderline Legion. Huang Tong did not expect Jiang Shan to quietly extend his hand into the Northern Borderline Legion, and even place a big nail by his side. Cooperate with Yang Shaoqing. Did Jiang Shan intend to use Yang Shaoqing to control Beijiang Corps? Why him? Huang Tong asked. His ability is average, his prestige is average, and his experience is average. I can't see any good points about him. His greatest strength is that he's obedient. Jiang Shan chuckled. Absolutely obedient. Huang Tong remained silent. Be obedient, for the current needs of Jiang Shan, this was indeed the greatest advantage. How should I cooperate? Huang Tong asked lightly. His heart did not waver. He did not want to be involved in the Northern Borderline Army and the Prince Group. He just wanted to escape. First of all, you have to make a deep self-examination. The army headquarters is watching everything about the Beijiang Corps. Dongqing Wudi will not express his position in a short time. When the time is right, I will ask the financial department of Beijiang to send the pension to the Beijiang Corps. At that time, the only thing you need to do is to cooperate with the publicity of the financial department of Beijiang and resign afterward. I will arrange for you to leave Zhongzhou State as soon as possible. Jiang Shan said concisely. Huang Tong had fully understood what Jiang Shan wanted. What he wanted was a complete Beijiang. He wanted to grasp the personnel power, the administrative power, and the most sensitive military power. This was the largest province of Zhongzhou State, with a total area of more than 1/6 of the whole Zhongzhou State. Although the environment was a little bad, if he could really grasp it, Beijiang was definitely a promising place. But the problem was how to grasp Jiang Shan. Huang Tong felt a little ridiculous and said subconsciously, "Do you really think you can grasp Beijiang tightly?" Once Jiang Shan's ambition was exposed, he would face not only the Prince Group, but the whole Zhongzhou State. Beijiang could not be separated. Even if Jiang Shan controlled everything in Beijiang, it was impossible. Without strength, he was not qualified. When Zhongzhou State issued a transfer order, some of Jiang Shan's trusted subordinates would be transferred away, or even directly. Jiang Shan would have little means to resist. A powerful provincial speaker who also served as a counselor was enough to make several groups in Zhongzhou State join hands to deal with him. He did not believe that Jiang Shan could not think of this. I have my own way. Jiang Shan remained calm. Split? Huang Tong narrowed his eyes. It's cooperation and balance. Jiang Shan laughed. At that time, someone will support me. Dongqing Wudi and even the president may support me. But this is not what you should pay attention to. Next, you should cooperate with Shaoqing. Huang Tong fell silent. He had no interest in the future of Beijiang. What he wanted most now was a way out. He changed his posture and said slowly, "Why should I believe you? After I do all this, I can leave Zhongzhou State and even live the kind of life you said. I can arrange for your family to leave first." Jiang Shan said flatly. If it's not enough, Huang Tong directly interrupted Jiang Shan with a sneer. Arrange for my family? Or do you want to threaten me with my family? Jiang Shan chuckled and said directly, I don't have to lie to you. You can also tell me directly what you want or what you want. There are many plans, and we can talk about them. Huang Tong was silent. Jiang Shan waited patiently for a while and chuckled again. It seems that you need to think about it. Huang Tong still did not speak. Jiang Shan's tone became softer and softer. I respect your choice, but you must know that your time is running out. He chuckled and silently hung up the phone. Huang Tong sat in the car with a livid face. Looking out of the window at the scenery that kept retreating, his expression was a little tangled and struggling. He had a lot of things to worry about. For example, was Jiang Shan trustworthy? For example, was the channel arranged by Jiang Shan safe? If everything was certain, would the so-called safe place become a different kind of cage? He would be controlled by Jiang Shan all the time, and sometimes even become a bargaining chip. Even if this was not the case, Zhongzhou State had always been persistent in hunting down traitors. Would his family be found? Huang Tong really did not want to leave Zhongzhou State unless it was a last resort. However, to find Qin Fangqing? How sure was he that he could protect himself? Huang Tong suddenly shook his head. He held the phone and seemed to be wondering whether to call Qin Fangqing again. The phone rang again. Huang Tong's arm trembled, and he answered the phone again. This time, the secretary on the other end of the phone was more careful. She reported the situation of Haoyue Group in a voice as light as a mosquito's hum. Huang Tong's face gradually turned livid, eventually pale, and then slowly became determined. December 5th. The morning of the second day after his arrival in Tiannan. After a short period of preparation, countless news about Haoyue Group were exposed by a large number of media almost at the same time. This behemoth with a market value of hundreds of billions was deeply rooted in various fields of Zhongzhou State. In its violent turmoil, all kinds of news were overwhelming in the eyes of everyone in Zhongzhou State. Tax evasion, power for money transactions, driving up prices, forced demolition, murder, suppressing competitors by illegal means, and embezzling public property in collaboration with some big shots. Haoyue Group was too big and involved too many fields. When all the news was exposed at the same time, the whole Haoyue Group was like a dirty black nest. Many decisions might not come from the senior management of Haoyue Group, but the decisions of its branches. However, with the death of the chairman of Haoyue Group, all the crimes were pointed at, intentionally or unintentionally. The dead chairman. To be more precise, it was pointed directly at Qin Fangqing. Overnight, more than 40 officials in 5 provinces of Zhongzhou State were strictly controlled. Among them, Southwest City and Tianfu Province became the hardest-hit areas. Numerous partners of the Haoyue Group terminated their cooperation with the Haoyue Group. The Flourishing Age Fund took action immediately. A large amount of funds poured into the stock market and crazily suppressed the stocks of the listed companies of Haoyue Group. It was all as if it had been prepared in advance. Before everyone could react, the shaky Haoyue group was close to collapse. In one morning, nearly 20% of the shares of Haoyue group had fallen into the hands of the Flourishing Age Fund. All the forces that followed the activities of the Flourishing Age Fund had different degrees of gains. The stock price of Haoyue group fell wildly, and bad news continued to be exposed. In the face of continuous bad news, everyone in Haoyue group could do nothing. In the third hour of the news exposure, the background of the chairman of Haoyue group gradually began to be exposed on the internet. Conspiracies and dangers seeped into reality from the internet, and all kinds of rumors completely shrouded Qin Fangqing. In the hidden dragon sea of Yuzhou state, Qin Fangqing sat in the office and carefully read the news one after another. His face was extremely gloomy. The MP of the propaganda department of Zhengzhou state had always been one of the leaders of the Prince group. But the news could appear in the major media, which already showed that the MP could not control the situation of the propaganda department at present. Or, did he not want to control it? The hostile takeover of the Flourishing Age Fund was carried out completely unscrupulously. Every moment, the shares of Haoyue group entered the pocket of the Flourishing Age Fund. The Ministry of Supervision had set up a task force and began to investigate the 5 provinces exposed in the news. Dozens of officials from several provinces were involved, so the Ministry of Supervision attached great importance to it. This storm was destined to be just the beginning. No one knew how big the case would be behind these dozens of officials. Qin Fangqing felt powerless. Everyone gave a push when a wall was down. Even he had a feeling of helplessness at this time. He managed to control his emotions and dialed the internal line. When the phone was connected, he asked directly, "What did Han Donglu say?" As soon as he found out that the Flourishing Age Fund attacked Haoyue group, he had asked his temporary secretary to contact Han Donglu and planned to meet him. On the phone, the young secretary, who was temporarily responsible for conveying Qin Fangqing's will because Yuan Lin was not there, said in a trembling voice, "Boss Han said that he is on his way to Tiannan and has no time to come to Yuzhou for the time being." Tiannan? Qin Fangqing suddenly felt a little uneasy. What is he doing in Tiannan? With whom? To be exact, he is going to Xianyuan City to attend the funeral of Emperor Dong's palace. Boss Han is now with Her Highness Situ Tsangyue and His Highness Wei Kunlun. The secretary said cautiously. Situ Tsangyue, Wei Kunlun, Saint, Qin Fangqing seemed to suddenly understand something at this moment. He thought of the thunderous attack of the Flourishing Age Fund on Haoyue group. He thought of the seemingly inexhaustible funds in Emperor Dong's palace that even he felt a little incredible. He thought of the different voices made by those who were on good terms with Han Donglu in the group recently. Han Donglu was standing with Saint and the Hidden God. He clenched his fists and abruptly hung up the phone. His face was livid. Military counselor. He took a deep breath, stood up, and kept pacing in the office. He didn't know what to do for the time being, but his instinct was telling him that he had to do something now. His cell phone rang. Qin Fangqing looked at the number and raised his eyebrows slightly. He answered the phone at once and said hello. Prime Minister, I have returned to Yuzhou. On the other end of the phone, Yuan Lin's voice rang. Qin Fangqing narrowed his eyes and said, "How was the talk?" "It went well." Yuan Lin chuckled in a low voice. His Highness Li Guangtu is also in Yuzhou at this time. He wants to meet you. Chapter 9-10. Li Tianlan didn't have a moment of leisure in the whole afternoon and evening. After arriving at Emperor Dong's palace, he didn't call anyone for a talk after he went to the cemetery. Instead, he found Bai Qingzhao and took him to meet the families of every victim. Among the families of more than 1,000 people, except for a few who had no relatives, everyone had at least one family or even a small one. Everyone gathered in Emperor Dong's palace at this time. In the atmosphere of great sadness, almost no one made any requests. Li Tianlan saw numb and even a little desperate faces. The parents who had lost their sons, the sisters who had lost their brothers, and the sisters who had lost their brothers. The people in Emperor Dong's palace were relatively young. Few of them were married and had children. But even so, Li Tianlan still saw some widows and children who had lost their husbands and fathers. Li Tianlan became more and more silent. Perhaps no power initially rose on the bones of its own people. The nightmare army that had lost more than half of its people, this was equivalent to the most powerful force of Emperor Dong's palace. The price of this rise was so heavy that the whole Emperor Dong's palace was covered with a layer of blood. The blood of their own people. The indescribable heaviness pressed on Li Tianlan's heart. He tried his best to meet each of the family members. Seeing their numb expressions and listening to their suppressed cries, Li Tianlan's heart was completely filled with a strong and complex emotion, which made him feel ashamed and even breathless. Bai Qingzhao made a promise without any hesitation. Everyone who died in Emperor Dong's palace would be regarded as a martyr. The pension of the military headquarters would be implemented within 3 days. Within the whole Zhongzhou state, every family member could enjoy all the benefits of a martyr's family. Li Tianlan also made a promise to Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace would award every soldier of the Nightmare Army with a Medal of Bravery. For those who died in the war, their immediate family members would have the opportunity to settle permanently in Xianyuan City and be allocated housing. In addition to the pension of Zhongzhou state, each family could get an extra 5 million yuan from Emperor Dong's palace as well as a commercial insurance of 500,000 yuan for each immediate family member. At the same time, all the jobs and employment opportunities in Xianyuan City would be open to the relatives of the martyrs who met the conditions. The children of the martyrs could enjoy special treatment in primary schools, junior high schools, senior high schools, and universities all over Zhongzhou state. Li Tianlan's voice was very light and gentle. The sword qi, as soft as a breeze, flowed slowly above Emperor Dong's palace. His voice easily covered the entire Emperor Dong's palace and reached everyone's ears. Bai Qingzhao was dumbfounded. Everyone in Emperor Dong's palace listened to Li Tianlan's promise. Even the grieving family members were in a daze. It was not that no one had thought that Emperor Dong's palace would compensate the dead, but no one had ever thought that the so-called compensation would be so. Bai Qingzhao shook his head subconsciously. For a moment, he did not know what to say. The members of the Nightmare Legion were real elites. Even in Zhongzhou state, their pensions were different from those of ordinary soldiers. They were all paid according to the pension standard of grassroots officers but slightly lower than that of middle-level officers. The exact amount was 3 million yuan for each of them. The compensation given by Li Tianlan was 5 million yuan plus an insurance of 500,000 yuan. There was only one compensation, but the insurance was 500,000 yuan for each immediate family member. This was practically the highest standard of compensation in the world. In addition, they would be allocated a house and permanent residence in Xianyuan City, which was equivalent to having a household registration in Xianyuan City. In this city, which was now like a luxury item, the work of household registration was still being prepared. But the household registration in Xianyuan City was already extremely popular. With the development of Emperor Dong's palace, the household registration in Xianyuan City would definitely become more and more popular, and the houses in Xianyuan City would naturally be more popular. In terms of other compensation, jobs, and education, Li Tianlan also made promises. There was no need to say anything more about his sincerity. Li Tianlan did not know what else he could do. Everything he said must be effective, and he himself could afford the compensation now. Not only the victims in this war, but from now on, the families of all the soldiers who died for Emperor Dong's palace could enjoy the same treatment. At this moment, Li Tianlan thought of the Li family, which was supported by Li Honghe, and the large graveyard of the Li family. Li Tianlan could not resurrect the people who died for the Li family and Emperor Dong's palace. He could only try his best to compensate them so that they would not have to worry about the future. At least, he had to be worthy of what they had done for Emperor Dong's palace. As for buying people's hearts and minds, Li Tianlan had never thought about it. Small favors might be used to buy people's hearts, but after his promise was made and realized, those who still thought so could only be called stupid. When the compensation exceeded a certain limit, it showed his sincerity. It was enough to make everyone in Emperor Dong's palace die for Li Tianlan. It was a kind of sincerity that everyone knew that even if they died in the war, their families could live a good life. When it was nearly midnight, Bai Qingzhao ended the meeting with the family members. He looked a little tired. He was no longer young and did not know martial arts, so he was naturally in poor spirits. Ning Qianqing followed Li Tianlan and glanced at Bai Qingzhao. He said softly, I have informed the kitchen to make some supper. We won't drink wine. Anyway, eat something and rest. I'll go to the cemetery again. Li Tianlan shook his head and patted Ning Qianqing on the shoulder. Take the Secretary General there to eat something and then rest. Don't worry about us. Ning Qianqing seemed to want to say something, but when he saw Qin Weibai, who had been quietly following Li Tianlan, he nodded and walked over with Bai Qingzhao. Qin Weibai gently held Li Tianlan's hand and exerted a little force. Are you tired? Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weibai. I'm fine. Qin Weibai smiled gently and asked, Are you tired? Li Tianlan shook his head. Nowadays, unless he was greatly hurt, he basically did not feel tired. But after meeting with so many family members, his heart had been hit by strong emotions, so it was inevitable that he felt a little tired. Shaking his head, Li Tianlan took a deep breath and walked toward the cemetery. He said softly, I asked Badian to compile a list of the dead. I'll be in the cemetery tonight. You stay with me. He did not ask Qin Weibai if she wanted to rest. He did not ask anything. It was just a simple notice. Tomorrow was the day of burial. More than 1,000 soldiers of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan wanted them to leave without any scruples, but at the same time, he would leave their last trace in Emperor Dong's palace before they were buried. He was the owner of Emperor Dong's palace. Qin Weibai was the hostess of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan was there, and Qin Weibai had to be there. It was their obligation. Okay. Qin Weibai nodded obediently. Li Tianlan bent down and picked Qin Weibai up. The sword light flickered slightly. Their figures disappeared in an instant. The soft sound of running water rang in the night. A chilly wind blew through Xianyuan City in the middle of the night. Qin Weibai came down from Li Tianlan's arms and saw the huge morning hall that was still lit. It was quiet in the morning hall. But many family members of the dead were keeping watch here. Seeing Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai suddenly appear, many people subconsciously stood up. Sit down. Li Tianlan shook his head. He gestured for them to sit down. He looked at the crowd in the morning hall and did not speak for a long time. Your Majesty, you, a young man who looked to be in his 30s, took 2 steps forward with some hesitation. Li Tianlan glanced at him and pointed to a direction not far from the morning hall. A high black wall had been erected there. The black wall was more than 10 meters high, thick and solemn. It was a neatly cut rectangle. It was a wall with a length of tens of meters, a height of more than 10 meters, and a thickness of nearly 3 meters. The edge of the wall was carved with complicated patterns and surrounded by blooming flowers. Behind the flowers was the clear surging lake. An exquisite arch bridge crossed the water and led straight to the cemetery. Li Tianlan glanced at the high wall and said calmly, This is the Wall of Heroes in Emperor Dong's palace. I have got the list of the dead from Badian. I will carve their names on the Wall of Heroes one by one. This will be the last trace they left in this world and the most important trace they left in Emperor Dong's palace. Because they are the beginning of the glory of Emperor Dong's palace, and they will become the history of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. I will not forget them. In the future, Emperor Dong's palace and my descendants will not forget them. The young man looked at Li Tianlan in a daze. The corner of his mouth moved, but he could not say anything for a while. Li Tianlan nodded to him and walked to the Wall of Heroes, which was extremely solemn and deep in the night. Li Badian was already waiting there. He solemnly held a long list in his hand. Li Tianlan took the list and handed it to Qin Weibai. You read it, and I will write it. He ordered. It was like a ceremony. It was the simplest ceremony, but it was also the ceremony of the highest standard in Emperor Dong's palace. Okay. Qin Weibai took the list with both hands. Her body was straight, and her long hair was flying in the night wind. She looked down at the list, and there was an indescribable holiness in the watery night. Her eyes fell on the list and she read the first name. The sword energy surged in front of the wall of heroes. Li Tianlan put his fingers together like a sword and carefully carved the first name on the dark wall. The night was getting darker and darker. The sword energy surged on the wall of heroes. Li Tianlan wrote in the air, very seriously, stroke by stroke. People in the morning hall gradually came over. More and more people came over, surrounding Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai in the center. They watched and listened quietly. The hostess of Emperor Dong's palace said one name after another in a soft and gentle voice. In the bright sword light, the young Emperor Dong carved the names on the wall one by one, and they became the history of Emperor Dong's palace. Heaven and earth were silent. In front of the black wall of heroes, everything seemed to have frozen. Suddenly, there was an extremely suppressed cry in the crowd. The cry seemed to be contagious, and the range was getting wider and wider. Li Tianlan quietly carried out his own carving. His eyes were also very quiet, but behind the silence, there seemed to be an extremely fierce storm brewing in the depths of his eyes. From late night to dawn. From dawn to noon. When a private helicopter slowly entered the Tiannan area and approached Xianyuan City, Li Tianlan finally carved the names of more than 1,000 victims on the wall of heroes. Every stroke was densely packed. Li Tianlan stared at the area on the wall full of names. After a long silence, his fingers moved slightly. A line of extremely simple words appeared behind the list of names. December 2nd, Desert. That was the end of his description. That was probably the only description that Zhongzhou State could reluctantly allow. He stood in front of the wall of heroes for a while and slowly turned around. Qin Weibai had carefully put away the list and looked at her quietly. After standing all night, her posture was still straight, but her lips were a little pale. Because she hadn't drunk any water, there were even some very slight chapped lips. Drink some water and have a good rest at night. Li Tianlan said softly. Qin Weibai nodded and said yes. Tianlan, is the burial after lunch? Ning Qianqing came over and asked. The funeral in Emperor Dong's palace was simple. No one was invited. Only Bai Qingzhao represented the military ministry. Except for him, everyone else was from Emperor Dong's palace. After all, it was not a happy event. There was no noise, no so-called liveliness. It was quiet, solemn, sad, and depressing. Such a Emperor Dong's palace was like a wounded beast licking its wounds alone, refusing all people who had nothing to do with the funeral and the deceased. Li Tianlan glanced at him, thought for a while, and said, ask the family members. Besides, not all the people are here yet. Wait for our 2 deputy palace masters. Ning Qianqing was stunned. Deputy palace masters? 2. He glanced at Qin Weibai subconsciously. Qin Weibai smiled and shook her head. As everyone knew, there was only one deputy palace master in Emperor Dong's palace, and he was saint of the invincible realm. Ning Qianqing raised his eyebrows and asked, who is the new deputy palace master? They will be here soon. Li Tianlan said calmly. The helicopter flew over the sky. As far as the eye could see, the vague outline of Xianyuan City could be seen. Military counselor, who had been staring at Xianyuan City, suddenly smiled and said softly, I'm a little nervous. I'm nervous. Why? Saint sat in his seat and was watching a variety show on the cabin TV. Hearing Saint's words, he shook his head subconsciously and smiled. Maybe I'm used to hiding in the dark. When being sinister becomes an instinct, people who are about to appear in the light will indeed be nervous. Han Donglu was silent for a while. He turned to look at Saint and wondered, aren't you the same? Among the 12 super masters of samsara, except for Flaming Fire, who had always been with Qin Weibai. The other supermasters had their own duties. But Saint and Military Counselor, who ranked at the top, rarely appeared. Strictly speaking, they were the existences of hiding in the dark. Countless experts in the dark world were killed by them. In the end, they also tricked Zhongzhou State. Mount Shu and the Flourishing Age Fund directly supported the power of Samsara Palace in Zhongzhou State. They had an absolute guarantee in both money and force, especially after Saint entered the invincible realm. Of course, I'm different from you. Saint snorted. That's true. Han Donglu nodded thoughtfully. I'm more low-key. I'm really different from you. You? Low-key? Situ Tsangyue, who had been silent, glanced at Han Donglu. For Zhongzhou State, Han Donglu was a philanthropist, the god of fortune, and the patriarch of a neutral wealthy family. But internationally, the Flourishing Age Fund could be said to be really notorious. Han Donglu's great reputation was accumulated by the Flourishing Age Fund again and again in the international financial market. Star State, East Island, countless countries, it was especially so for some countries with relatively weak forces and imperfect financial order. They hated and feared Han Donglu. Every time there was a bloody storm, Han Donglu was always at the forefront of the struggle. Such a person could not be said to be low-key in any case. That's actually right. Saint nodded. He is indeed low-key in the dark world. Situ Tsangyue froze and also fell silent. Han Donglu. Military Counselor of Samsara Palace. Before she knew this news, it was impossible for her to link these two identities together. Except for a few extremely important occasions, Military Counselor of Samsara Palace basically did not show up. If he was confined to the dark world, Military Counselor was indeed extremely low-key, so low-key that he did not even have a sense of existence. He silently controlled the core saber of Samsara Palace. He silently developed his strength. He silently extended his hand to the six. He silently supported the development of the Flourishing Age Fund. Finally, he revealed his identity at the most appropriate time. Everyone was inexplicably shocked and dumbfounded, and then there was fear from the bottom of their hearts. In today's Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan had the strongest force, and Emperor Dong's palace had the strongest cohesion. The existence of Han Donglu made up for all the shortcomings of Emperor Dong's palace. This alone was enough to show his importance. Situ Tsangyue thought silently for a while, and suddenly looked up at Military Counselor. I have a question. Military Counselor was a little confused. Situ Tsangyue narrowed her eyes and said calmly, in the past 2 years, have you been secretly supporting the development and construction of Emperor Dong's palace? Military Counselor said, ah, and nodded. Situ Tsangyue did not ask how much the investment was, because it must be an astronomical number that was enough to suffocate her. She just felt a little strange. With such a large investment amount, the capital movement of the Flourishing Age Fund has not been noticed by Zhongzhou State. How is this possible? As far as I know, Zhongzhou State, especially several departments with real power in the cabinet, has been keeping an eye on the capital flow of the Flourishing Age Fund. And even if they haven't found it, don't the people in Emperor Dong's palace know it? They don't even know where their money comes from, do they? They really don't know. Han Donglu chuckled in a low voice. This sentence seemed to include Zhongzhou State and Emperor Dong's palace. Situ Tsangyue raised her eyebrows. Why is it like this? Han Donglu pointed to Saint and said, this guy said it was my instinct to be insidious. I don't think so. But the Flourishing Age Fund is such a big industry, and the Samsara Palace is such a big industry. As the custodian, how can I not be careful? In any case, I have to be careful. So. Situ Tsangyue was thoughtful. So, it's me who secretly funded the construction of Emperor Dong's palace, but it's not the Flourishing Age Fund. Situ Tsangyue was silent for half a minute, and then slowly said, that is to say, the Flourishing Age Fund is not your entire industry. Behind the Flourishing Age Fund, you have other sources of money? It's the Samsara Palace. Han Donglu corrected her and nodded. Of course, the Flourishing Age Fund is a part of us that has been exposed. When this part was exposed, the palace master was ready to be found out by the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, so he left a part of the industry to develop in secret. But they never found out. I disguised it so well. It's a pity. Industry, Situ Tsangyue was thoughtful. What industries do you have in Zhongzhou State? Or, what industries do you have in the world? Everyone thought that Han Donglu of the Flourishing Age Fund was a financial giant. Although he was also involved in industry, he did not have many, and many of his projects were with Zhongzhou State. But now it seemed that the Samsara Palace was more deeply hidden than he had imagined. A lot, Han Donglu thought for a while. For him, who wanted to retire and rest, these problems would be handed over to Situ Tsangyue and Saint sooner or later. He thought seriously and slowly said, "We have a lot of shares in many enterprises. Some of them are held in secret, and some are entrusted with shares." Many. Well, I'll sort out the details and give them to you. Many. Situ Tsangyue thought about the so-called a lot and asked subconsciously, how many? More than 600. Han Donglu said casually. How many? Situ Tsangyue felt that her ears could not be trusted for a moment. I must have misheard, I must have misheard. More than 600, more than 1/10 of which belong to the world's top 500 companies. There are also several funds similar to the Flourishing Age Fund. Han Donglu said slowly, that's about it. Situ Tsangyue felt a little breathless for a moment. Everything Han Donglu said was completely beyond her wildest imagination. She had no idea how much wealth it meant. In fact, one thing is right. Saint suddenly said, the outside world thinks that the Flourishing Age Fund can mobilize more than 1 trillion funds in the shortest time. It's not wrong, but they seem to have misunderstood something. The so-called trillion is not Zhongzhou State dollars, but star dollars. Situ Tsangyue took several deep breaths in a row, but still said nothing. Star dollars was the currency of Star State. In recent decades, the exchange rate with Zhongzhou State dollars had been 1 to 3, which meant that the Flourishing Age Fund was 1/3 of the economic strength exposed by Samsara Palace. This is, how did they do it? Situ Tsangyue couldn't help but ask, and her tone was full of disbelief. She really didn't know how to express her inner amazement. This was done by the palace master. Han Donglu said calmly. Situ Tsangyue was silent for a long time, and then whispered, a miracle. Miracle. Han Donglu said the word silently several times, and then laughed. He pointed to Xianyuan City, which was already close at hand. The real miracle is in front of us. Situ Tsangyue stood up and quietly looked at Xianyuan City, which was getting closer and closer, and the eye-catching Emperor Dong's palace in Xianyuan City. She took a deep breath, and her face gradually calmed down. Situ Tsangyue. Wei Kunlun. Han Donglu. They were only 3 people. But today, they brought a lot of things. The elites of Mount Shu and Sai City would enter Emperor Dong's palace as soon as possible and become a new, larger nightmare legion than before. The Flourishing Age Fund and all the industries of Samsara Palace would be integrated with Emperor Dong's palace as soon as possible to make up for all the shortcomings of Emperor Dong's palace. From today on, Han Donglu would serve as the chief financial officer of Emperor Dong's palace, responsible for the merger of the Flourishing Age Fund and Emperor Dong's palace. This would also be his last job before retirement. And Situ Tsangyue would become the 2nd deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace and the 3rd invincible realm expert of Emperor Dong's palace. A new identity, a new path, a new future, and a new stage. Under the sun, the helicopters slowly landed in the solemn and silent Emperor Dong's palace. The 3 of them tidied up their clothes and slowly walked out of the cabin. In a solemn atmosphere. This was destined to be a grand debut that shocked the world. Divine Emperor of 9 Heavens. Chapter 911. It was December 7th. It was a snowstorm in Beihai. It seemed to be located in the northernmost part of Zhongzhou State. The winter here was extremely cold and beautiful. The flying snow was almost endless. Wang Xingxiao sat on the steps of the stage of Formidable Person and listened to the loud sound of the tide in the distance quietly. He was motionless and let the snowflakes fall on him, like a snowman. The sword energy all over the sky surged from the distant sea and then slowly dispersed. The sword energy covered the entire stage of Formidable Person, and the sword intent became more and more delicate. Wang Xingxiao closed his eyes and seemed to be in eternal meditation. The sword energy tide in the depths of Beihai had become more and more active. From once a day in the beginning to twice a day now, the surging sword intent became more and more delicate and clear. Wang Xingxiao meditated on the stage of Formidable Person every morning and night, rain or shine. He felt the increasingly delicate sword intent and gained something almost every day. After his martial arts officially broke through the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and became a half-step invincible realm expert, his meditation in the sword intent was far more efficient than practicing hard in other places. Wang Xingxiao meditated twice a day for about 6 hours in total, which was the limit of his meditation. It was not that his willpower couldn't support him to continue meditating, but as the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, it was really difficult for him to spare extra time for cultivation. However, although 6 hours of meditation a day was not much, in the sword energy tide, it was equivalent to about a week of hard practice in a normal state, or even more. Meditation was to train his willpower and establish his own martial arts path in the deepest level of quietness. Now he gained something every day, and he gained something every day in the half-step invincible realm. It was absolutely a terrifying thing. The peaceful and heavy sword energy tide began to fade slowly, becoming more and more ethereal and lofty. Wang Xingxiao opened his eyes and stood facing Beihai for a while. Then he slowly turned around and walked down the stage of Formidable Person. It was quiet on Mount Dibing. The guards stood silently in their posts, like snowmen. Wang Xingxiao walked into his huge palace in the snowstorm. The heating supply in the hall of the palace was extremely sufficient. Wang Xingxiao casually took off his coat and said with a smile, "It's been quite cold recently." Lu Shuanghua was already sitting on the sofa in the hall. When he saw Wang Xingxiao, he stood up with a smile and said casually, "According to the weather station, the blizzard will last until tomorrow morning, and then it will turn into heavy snow. In the next half a month, there will be no sunny days." The meteorological observatory in Beihai had always been extremely accurate, and there was basically no deviation. Wang Xingxiao smiled and said meaningfully, "It doesn't matter. We should be able to see the sun in half a month." Lu Shuanghua nodded in agreement. She bent down to pick up a stack of documents and handed them to Wang Xingxiao. She said softly, "Everything you want is here. If there's nothing else, I should go back." He was responsible for all the intelligence of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. With Li Tianlan's release from prison, Lu Shuanghua had become the busiest person in the Wang family of Beihai. Everyone in the Wang family of Beihai was busy. A large number of people were building the defense system of Beihai, searching for the elites of the superpowers who had sneaked into Beihai, and preparing for the next decisive battle. There were battles almost every day in every city in Beihai, but Lu Shuanghua was still the busiest. Collecting intelligence about Emperor Dong's palace, targeting the prince group, and using some information to attack the opponents, Zhongzhou State was really turbulent in a few days. Lu Shuanghua didn't even have time to rest. "Don't worry. You can leave after dinner. There are many things to do." Wang Xingxiao waved his hand and asked Lu Shuanghua to sit down. He looked down at the report in his hand. This was an assessment report that could not be said to be detailed. It could even be said to be very rough and simple. Not only the Wang family of Beihai, but also all the superpowers in the world, even many countries, groups, and wealthy families in Zhongzhou State had a similar report. However, because different countries and wealthy families had different resources, the contents of their reports would be different. Relatively speaking, the contents of the Wang family of Beihai's report were undoubtedly more substantial. This was a report about Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace did not invite anyone to the funeral in Xianyuan City 2 days ago. But countless eyes were focused on Xianyuan City. So when the funeral began and Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai knelt in front of the cemetery at the same time, a piece of shocking news swept the world like a hurricane. After Saint Wei Kunlun, Emperor Dong's palace welcomed the second deputy palace master of the invincible realm. Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou state. Sai City of Zhongzhou state would be merged into Emperor Dong's palace and renamed Hall of Falling Stars. All the top assassins of Sai City had found their positions in Emperor Dong's palace. Compared with Situ Tsangyue joining Emperor Dong's palace, the identity of military counselor was more frightening. Military counselor Han Donglu. Everyone knew what this identity meant. On the afternoon of the funeral, Li Tianlan and Han Donglu had signed a series of documents at the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. The Flourishing Age Fund would be merged into Emperor Dong's palace. In the series of documents, Han Donglu directly and unconditionally transferred 85% of the shares of the Flourishing Age Fund to Li Tianlan. The entire Flourishing Age Fund, a large consortium, really became Li Tianlan's property the moment the documents were signed. On the night of December 5th, the elites of Mount Shu, which belonged to Nirvana Sword Master Wei Kunlun and Great Void Sword Master Li Beidian, officially left Mount Shu and joined Emperor Dong's palace. The elites of Sai City and the forces of Mount Shu entered Xianyuan City at the same time. Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang Sword Master of Mount Shu, witnessed all this and then took away Nirvana Sword and Great Void Sword of Mount Shu. This also meant that Wei Kunlun and Li Beidian officially left Mount Shu. With the addition of Mount Shu, the Flourishing Age Fund, and Sai City, the Nightmare Troop, which had been badly injured, immediately returned to its peak state, and its strength was even stronger than before. December 5th. This was a day destined to be remembered by the whole dark world. Too many things happened on this day. To sum up, Emperor Dong's palace rose completely. And it really soared to the sky. Countless forces in the whole dark world were in turmoil. Zhongzhou state was also in turmoil. For a moment, people didn't even know what it meant when half of the forces of Mount Shu, the forces of Sai City, and the Flourishing Age Fund joined Emperor Dong's palace. So there was the evaluation report in Wang Xingxiao's hand. All the forces were using their own intelligence to make analysis. They were analyzing a series of chain reactions that might be triggered after the three forces merged into Emperor Dong's palace. One thing was certain. Today's Emperor Dong's palace might not be a superpower in the dark world as a whole, but in terms of experts and wealth, it definitely had the strength of a top superpower. More importantly, this was just the beginning. It was a magnificent and unparalleled beginning. What would Emperor Dong's palace become in the future? This was a problem that made everyone unable to eat or sleep in peace. Wang Xingxiao looked at the report in his hand carefully. Although the report was relatively general, it could actually be regarded as detailed. The report listed a series of industries of the Flourishing Age Fund, as well as its superficial contacts and a large number of investments. Compared with Mount Shu and Sai City, the report about the Flourishing Age Fund occupied more than 80% of the space. Combining all the intelligence that the Flourishing Age Fund could collect, the intelligence personnel of Jiangnan province analyzed the changes that occurred after the Flourishing Age Fund entered Emperor Dong's palace one by one. The analysis was concise and clear. Wang Xingxiao flipped through it and found that there were hundreds of analyses of the Flourishing Age Fund alone. He saw an extremely sensitive word at the end of the Flourishing Age Fund. Wang Xingxiao raised his eyebrows. A new group. This is inevitable. Lu Shuanghua glanced at him and said slowly, Han Donglu is the military counselor of Samsara Palace. No one thought of this, but this is also the biggest gain of Emperor Dong's palace. The endless money means that Emperor Dong's palace has passed the initial primitive accumulation stage. But for Zhongzhou state and for us, the most troublesome thing is Han Donglu's contacts. Over the years, since the emergence of the Flourishing Age Fund, Han Donglu has been accepting of all kinds of investments. He alone can support a neutral wealthy family that even the Wang family of Beihai dare not underestimate. You should know better than me how formidable his contacts are. Wang Xingxiao was silent. And now it seems that the signs of a new group are obvious. Lu Shuanghua continued. 2 days passed after the funeral. Tiannan was very calm. But inside Zhongzhou State, there were already stormy waves. The betrayal of the Special Warfare Group was getting more and more intense. With the establishment of a super high-standard task force led by Dongqing Wudi, elite investigators from various departments joined the task force. They investigated along the route of retreat of the Burning Legion when they raided Yuzhou. There were more and more clues. The Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou was in a state of panic. Several high-level officials had been directly dismissed and put under control. The Prince Group, which started with the Haoyue Group, was also not calm inside. This was originally a storm stirred up by the Wang family of Beihai, but a lot of evidence suddenly emerged out of thin air. Everything about the chairman of the Haoyue Group was exposed little by little. He was Chen Fengqing's nephew, which was really hard not to associate. Chen Fengqing's personal reputation almost suffered a devastating blow. And inside the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group, different voices had gradually begun to appear. Many backbone forces were asking for self-examination. In the chaotic situation, the military counselor Han Donglu, who left Xianyuan City, flew to Tianfu Province as his first stop, which was enough to explain a lot of problems. And the attitude of the North Group had also changed dramatically. They attacked the Prince Group without mercy. Now in Zhongzhou State, almost everyone saw an opportunity. Behind the great turmoil and storm, there was often an equally great division of interests. No one was willing to miss this carnival. There were also voices in the academics that asked for a good investigation of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group. As for the Southeast Group and the Giant Group, as the leaders of a series of events, their positions were needless to say. At present, the framework of the new group was still very vague, at least in the eyes of outsiders. Wang Xingxiao could only roughly circle a range. Among the voices of self-examination in the Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group, there must be a considerable part of them who had a close relationship with Han Donglu. A considerable part of this part had decided to change their position and join the new group, while the others were mostly influenced by the rhythm. As long as the two groups investigated carefully, they could basically find out who the people in the new group were. The two groups were also clear about this, but in the face of this situation, they could do nothing. As for the North Group, it was the group that had the deepest involvement with Han Donglu. The Flourishing Age Fund also invested the most in the North Group. If the new group was established, it was hard to say whether the North Group would exist or not. Who would join the new group and what position they would get after the election? Everyone, including the North Group, could not be sure. And the academics also could not be sure. For the time being, it was hard to say whether those who insisted on investigating the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group were doing it for their personal interests or for the new group. As for the Southeast Group, a few names flashed through Wang Xingxiao's mind, and he had another headache. Everyone in the Southeast Group was attacking the Prince Group to death. At present, it was impossible to tell how many people had other ideas. Not counting those who could not be confirmed, Wang Xingxiao could be sure that they were a big force. Some of them had been loyal to the Li family when Beihai and the Li family were close. What was a group? The so-called group was the power produced by the combination of relatively loose and vague organizations with clear positions. This was not a company party. The senior officials scattered all over Zhongzhou State had their own attitudes. In many cases, it was hard to tell who was on whose side. Each group roughly had its own core circle, which was also the core force of the group, and most of the others were relatively peripheral personnel. The new group appeared very suddenly. This also meant that for many years or even 1 or 2 elections in the future, it was difficult for anyone except Emperor Dong's palace to really confirm the specific lineup of the new group. Some core members with high positions could confirm it. But what about the people one level lower? What about the people one level lower? This also meant that in the future, all the major groups would be in the same position as the new group. This kind of advantage was so huge that it was unimaginable. Maybe the major groups would push the candidates they favored and supported, only to find out in the end that they were cultivating talents for the new group. This was very likely. As for the general election next year, the situation of the general election would be more complicated than before. Why not merge with the giant group? Li Tianlan will also be the leader of the giant group in the future. Wang Xingxiao said slowly. It's impossible for Emperor Dong's palace to do this. The disadvantages outweigh the advantages. It's not easy to control. Lu Shuanghua shook her head. The new group, Wang Xingxiao muttered to himself and smiled bitterly. He held the information and was silent for a long time. He was very ambitious and wanted a lot. In the final battle in Beihai, in addition to killing all the enemies, his most important goal was the Xianyuan Feng in Li Tianlan's hand. Or rather, ruthlessness. That was an important condition to ensure that the Wang family of Beihai was invincible. As compensation for Li Tianlan, after he got ruthlessness, he originally planned to give Li Tianlan a new group. But now, a new group had appeared. So what else could he give? It was impossible to take Xianyuan Feng without paying a huge price. If he snatched it, it meant that after the final battle in Beihai, the cooperation between the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace would be completely broken. They would turn against each other and then become mortal enemies. If that was the case, Wang Xingxiao was not afraid. With Xianyuan Feng, even Li Tianlan would not be his opponent. But the problem was that once he snatched it, the Lin clan's attitude would change. Wang Xingxiao rubbed his forehead hard. After a long time, he muttered to himself, "It's really difficult." Chapter 9:12. Wang Xingxiao finally put down the document in his hand. Countless analyses in this document were favorable to Emperor Dong's palace, which meant that the intelligence personnel and senior personnel of the Wang family of Beihai were optimistic about the integration of the Flourishing Age Fund, Sai City, and Mount Shu with Emperor Dong's palace. They were optimistic about the abilities of Li Tianlan, Wei Kunlun, Han Donglu, and Situ Cangyue. They didn't think that the merger would bring trouble to Emperor Dong's palace. On the contrary, the merger would only bring Li Tianlan huge and irresistible benefits. This was not what Wang Xingxiao had expected. To be exact, the fact that several superpowers joined Emperor Dong's palace one after another was not what Wang Xingxiao had expected. He looked calm on the surface, but his mind was in a mess. The more he read the document, the less he could make up his mind. Shaking his head, Wang Xingxiao smiled and said, "That's it for now. Stay for lunch and have a drink together." Lu Shuanghua hesitated. He nodded and said, "All right." He stood up and said, "I'm going to talk to Xian Ming." As the person in charge of all the intelligence of Beihai in Zhongzhou State, it was necessary to talk to the person in charge of all the intelligence of Beihai and unify the intelligence in his hands. Wang Xingxiao nodded and agreed. Lu Shuanghua bowed slightly and took his leave. Just as he was about to leave the hall, his footsteps paused as if he wanted to say something. "What?" Wang Xingxiao noticed his abnormality and asked casually. Lu Shuanghua hesitated. Then he turned around and smiled. "Patriarch, what's the attitude of the Wang family of Beihai toward Emperor Dong's palace?" He had to ask this question clearly. Regardless of what he thought in his heart, he was the person in charge of Jiangnan society, responsible for collecting all the intelligence of Zhongzhou State for the Wang family of Beihai. The rise of Emperor Dong's palace was unstoppable. In the future, Li Tianlan would be more and more important on the stage of Zhongzhou State. If he did not figure out the attitude of Mount Dibbing in advance, it meant that Jiangnan society was likely to lose some important intelligence. "What do you mean?" Wang Xingxiao remained calm. "As far as I know, although we are not on good terms with Emperor Dong's palace now, at least we have the same goal. But when our development model overlaps and we have a strong enemy, the two forces with the same development model are each other's best allies. That is to say, the current strength of Emperor Dong's palace is not bad for us." Lu Shuanghua said calmly. "That's right." Wang Xingxiao nodded. "But you missed one word, now. The strength of Emperor Dong's palace is not bad for us now, but this kind of strength can't go beyond the limit. We are allies with Emperor Dong's palace, but no one in the Wang family of Beihai wants the so-called allies to be stronger than themselves. The two sides can cooperate now because they both need to protect themselves. They have common interests and a common position. But what about after the prince group's matter ends? With a strong enemy on the side, the two forces with overlapping development models are indeed the best allies for each other. But Zhongzhou State can't always target Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace. Zhongzhou State needs opportunities. When there are no opportunities, tell me, what are the two forces with almost overlapping development models? Lu Shuanghua was silent for a while, then said softly, opponent. There's no need to fight to the death, but it's destined that we can't coexist peacefully. Wang Xingxiao said slowly, to some extent, this kind of relationship is also a means to calm down strong enemies. He leaned back and said, you know what to do. Lu Shuanghua nodded, stood there for a while, then turned around and left the hall. A tall lady walked in at the same time. Lu Shuanghua glanced at her. The two nodded slightly and walked past each other. The woman paused in front of the hall door, turned her head and looked at Lu Shuanghua thoughtfully, then walked into the hall. Wang Xingxiao had already stood up from the sofa and called his aunt. There's no problem in Xingzhou, at least for the time being. Phoenix, who had an obvious scar on her face, said in a calm tone. This woman, who was entangled with the Wang family of Beihai but had to stay in Beihai because of summer solstice, could be said to be the strongest combat force of the Wang family of Beihai now. She and Wang Tianzong's protector, Punishment, had been traveling to various cities in Beihai in recent days. After getting the exact information, she killed nearly 10 thunder-shocking realm experts in a short time. Today, the elites of the superpowers lurking in Xingzhou had basically been killed. Thank you for your hard work, Aunt. Wang Xingxiao smiled. But new lurkers will soon enter Xingzhou. There's no end to these people. Recently, their actions are getting more and more obvious, especially in East Island. They almost don't cover up anymore. Just kill them again. Phoenix's voice was calm and cold. Wang Xingxiao nodded, sat down again and said, Aunt, what can I do for you? Let me see how you're going to court death. Phoenix stared into Wang Xingxiao's eyes and said seriously. Wang Xingxiao looked up in surprise, a little confused. Emperor Dong's palace now has 2 invincible realm experts. You know what that means. Their military power may still be weak, but if you only look at the experts, they have 2 invincible realm experts and Li Tianlan, who hasn't reached the invincible realm but whose combat capability is very likely to be close to the peak of the invincible realm. Now Emperor Dong's palace can be said to be the #1 superpower in the dark world in terms of high-end combat capability. You want to cooperate with them, and now you are already in a cooperative state. Emperor Dong's palace has the flourishing Age Fund, Sai City, and half of the power of Mount Shu. Don't forget the relationship between Jade Pool in Zhongzhou State and the Dongqing clan. Next, a large part of Jade Pool's power may also join Emperor Dong's palace. They have money and people, and their military power will soon become strong. Your cooperation with Emperor Dong's palace is tantamount to asking a tiger for its skin. What's worse is that in this cooperation, you still want to get Xianyuan Feng. Xia Huang paused, looked at Wang Xingxiao, and said with some incomprehension, do you really want to die? Wang Xingxiao was silent for a long time before he said slowly, that's the core that can guarantee the Wang family of Beihai's invincibility. With Wu Qing, even if my father hasn't recovered from his injury, I can still be invincible in the world. Even if my martial arts can't make any progress in my life, Li Tianlan will become the chosen one in the future, and the Wang family of Beihai will also have the capital to fight against Emperor Dong's palace in the most cutting-edge combat capability. We now have a very good opportunity, or even the best opportunity. I have 80% confidence that I can take down Wu Qing, not to deal with Li Tianlan now, but to fight against the truly invincible Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace in the future. So, I have no choice. If I can't become the chosen one, Wu Qing is the core trump card to ensure the Wang family of Beihai's dominance in the dark world. Wu Qing, Phoenix murmured to herself. Xianyuan Feng is conscious and has its own thoughts and will. Right now, it's the amalgamation of many murderous weapons. When it has enough energy, its will is the most active. You can't say that it's a sword, you can even treat it like a person. Wang Xingxiao said slowly. Ha, Phoenix sneered. A person. If it can be regarded as a person, then it can be said to be truly loyal to Li Tianlan. If you take it away, will it definitely work for you? It is the fusion of many murderous weapons. What is a murderous weapon? For a force, a murderous weapon is enough to make them fight for it. If you take Xianyuan Feng, do you think Li Tianlan will let it go? He doesn't need the so-called new group you gave him now. As long as I get Wu Qing, I naturally won't be afraid of Li Tianlan. Wang Xingxiao said calmly. Wu Qing is not yours. Can you make use of it? Phoenix narrowed her eyes. She didn't understand Wang Xingxiao's persistence. And even if you can make use of Wu Qing, it is a murderous weapon in nature. When its energy is exhausted, the role it can play is extremely limited. With its own combat capability, with the help of 13 floors and Xianyuan Feng, it will be invincible. Yes. Wang Xingxiao said blandly, when the time is right, Wu Qing can destroy Wu Qing's will in an instant. What it needs is Wu Qing's energy. Once the two are combined, it will become more complete. At that time, there won't be a problem of insufficient energy. As long as you don't squander it, it can always be used. Wu Qing, Phoenix's face was solemn. She never thought of herself as a member of the Wang family of Beihai. Naturally, she couldn't get in touch with the secrets that only the patriarchs of each generation could. But it was not the first time she heard the word Wu Qing. Destroy Xianyuan Feng's will in an instant? She felt like she was listening to a joke. What is Wu Qing? Phoenix asked in a serious tone. Wang Xingxiao was silent for a while. Then he said, Core. Phoenix seemed to want to ask something else, but Wang Xingxiao interrupted her and asked, how is East Island? Phoenix paused for a while and shook her head slightly. You should ask Xian Ming about this. I don't know. But according to what I know, East Island has really put in a lot of effort and mobilized almost all the forces that can be mobilized. If this is a small war, we can't get support from Zhongzhou State. We can only rely on Beihai Corps. What about the odds of winning? Wang Xingxiao asked. It depends on the result of the final battle. If it's just about the army, it's almost impossible for us to defeat a country. East Island is small, but it's also a powerful country. Phoenix shook her head. Wang Xingxiao leaned on the sofa, clicked his tongue, and laughed. I remember a saying, a dog can't stop eating shit. Oh, that's not an appropriate description. Or, it's called forgetting the pain after the wound is healed. How many lessons do you think East Island needs to learn to understand its situation? 5 years ago, they suffered a big loss in the final battle of Heaven Capital. Now it's only been 5 years, and they actually forgot it. What a joke. She thought for a while, then shook her head and said, this time is different. In the final battle of Heaven Capital, Zhongzhou State restrained the main force of East Island. All the forces in the world took advantage of the situation and finally helped the purgatory of Heaven Capital. But now the forces that cooperate with East Island are all forces that are active in the dark world. Their attention is all on East Island, and Zhongzhou State can't help you. The general election is coming, and Zhongzhou State is troubled. They can't take care of East Island. What about Emperor Dong's palace? Wang Xingxiao suddenly said, now Emperor Dong's palace has a strong army, 2 superiors of the invincible realm, and Li Tianlan. Do you think he can put all the resources of Emperor Dong's palace into the final battle of Beihai? Li Tianlan and I don't have such a deep friendship. Although we are now in a cooperative relationship, from his standpoint, he needs the Wang family of Beihai, which has suffered a heavy loss but can still maintain a certain strength. If Beihai wins the final battle, he doesn't want to see it. I'm sure that Li Tianlan won't use too much power in the final battle of Beihai. Now there's Du Hanin, Su Chu, and some elites of Emperor Dong's palace here. Li Tianlan will come, but he will bring one deputy palace master of the invincible realm at most, or none at most. So, where will the two deputy palace masters go? Do you think? Wang Xingxiao's smile was complicated. Where will they go? Phoenix subconsciously straightened her body. East Island? Wang Xingxiao nodded. It's obvious, isn't it? It's a piece of cake for Li Tianlan to send most of the forces to take down East Island while East Island is empty. But in this way, Xianyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace will also be empty inside. Aren't they afraid? Afraid of what? Wang Xingxiao interrupted her. Is there anything in Xianyuan City that needs to be protected now? The construction of the city did cost a lot of money, but now Li Tianlan is not short of money. So what if he demolishes the castle? At worst, he can rebuild it. Besides, who will be interested in his castle? This has been proven long ago. In the past 2 years, except for the Burning Legion's raid on Tunan, Saint has been in Yuzhou for the past 2 years. Emperor Dong's palace is not invincible, but who dares to touch them? Let's not talk about whether they dare or not. What's the point? With the current strength of Emperor Dong's palace, no matter which force dares to touch the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace, they will have to face Li Tianlan's crazy revenge. It's not necessary. Emperor Dong's palace must go to East Island. Not only Emperor Dong's palace, but also the Purgatory of Heaven Capital has been silent for too long. After the final battle of Heaven Capital, my father fought with Li Kuangtu. He told me in private that Li Kuangtu's martial arts were very special. Being able to return to the peak of the invincible realm was enough to explain a lot of things, but it also limited his upper limit. He couldn't touch the real supreme realm, but in terms of rebuilding the foundation, his martial arts were indeed unparalleled. In 2 years, Li Kuangtu could at least restore some combat capability. In 2 years, Li Kuangtu can at least restore some of his combat capability. Now East Island mobilizes people on a large scale, and its interior is empty. How can the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which has been excluded in the past 2 years, let go of such a good opportunity? They will definitely take action. East Island's character is really stupid. After this, East Island will be very lively. East Island, Emperor Dong's palace, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital will divide the world into 3? His voice was a little emotional. The most uncomfortable thing is that we have to deal with the next final battle. I'm afraid we won't have a share in East Island, the fat meat. He shook his head. What a pity. Chapter 9:13. 2 invincible realm experts, the bright sun shone in the study. His Majesty gently dragged the information in front of him over and said with a smile, "It's really difficult to deal with." In front of him was also an evaluation report about Emperor Dong's palace. After the funeral, Emperor Dong's palace was more powerful than before, and it no longer had any obvious shortcomings. With Sai City, the Flourishing Age Fund, and half of Mount Shu joining Emperor Dong's palace, and with Li Tianlan's return, the strength of Emperor Dong's palace was not simply doubled. Its comprehensive strength had increased dozens of times. A force that was originally supported by young people swallowed the largest financial group in Zhongzhou State and the strongest assassin organization in Zhongzhou State within 1 day without encountering any obstacles. This was enough to make Emperor Dong's palace expand into a real behemoth. And it was certain that as long as Li Tianlan still stood at the peak of the force in the dark world, there would be no possibility of accidents during the integration of Emperor Dong's palace. It was no exaggeration to say that Emperor Dong's palace had now become the focus of the major forces in the dark world. It was also a big problem for them. Every force had an evaluation. But because of different intelligence and different focus, the information of each party would naturally be slightly different. Some people paid attention to the new group. Some people paid attention to the huge financial resources of Emperor Dong's palace. And His Majesty was most concerned about the force of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan, Saint Wei Kunlun, and hidden god Situtsang Yue. These three people had now formed the golden triangle of Emperor Dong's palace, and they were also at the top of the pyramid of individual force in the entire dark world. This lineup was enough to make anyone's scalp numb in front of them. His Majesty gently tapped the information in front of him and laughed. Now it's not just my scalp that's numb, but my whole body. We don't only have 2 invincible realm experts. Molade stood in front of His Majesty and was a little unconvinced. Your Majesty, you have 4 disciples, and the 3 who are still alive are all in the invincible realm. Not to mention His Majesty's personal strength, Molade himself was extremely close to the peak of the invincible realm. Yagyu Tsangxuan had also stabilized his invincible realm. Jiang Guochu was a new invincible realm expert, but he was invincible. Even if he was a new invincible realm expert, his realm was solid. If the 3 disciples stood together, they might not be much worse than the 3 people in Emperor Dong's palace. Your Majesty, you hold back Li Tianlan. I can barely hold back Situ Tsangyue and Wei Kunlun. Although I can't win, with the help of Yagyu Tsangxuan and Jiang Guochu, it is completely possible to kill them all. Molade was filled with killing intent. You forgot about Xianyuan Feng, or in other words, Wu Qing. His Majesty shook his head. And even if we can forget about that sword, can we win? 3 disciples. It's a good lineup, but it's just a good lineup. Li Tianlan has 2 invincible realm experts, and he can also gain the loyalty of 2 invincible realm experts. His Majesty laughed at himself. What about me? You can trust my loyalty completely. Molade's tone was solemn and serious, as if he was making an oath. I can trust you. His Majesty said blandly, but what about Yagyu Tsangxuan and Jiang Guochu? I won't trust them completely unless I'm stupid. Similarly, they can't be completely loyal to me. No, they can't even be loyal to me. The 2 of us are completely using each other. It's just that I have a certain amount of initiative. I can give them benefits, and they can also give me benefits. This kind of benefit is great, but it's not so great that they can completely rely on me. Molade was silent for a while and whispered, but Li Tianlan is dying. We don't need to worry too much about Emperor Dong's palace. You don't understand what I mean. His Majesty said calmly, it's not a matter of whether we should worry about Li Tianlan or not. Even if Li Tianlan doesn't die, he's just an enemy. As far as we are concerned, what we need is power, more powerful forces, more power. A Knights Templar that only belongs to us is not enough. Do you understand? I understand. Molade said seriously, Your Highness, I can give you power, and I will completely obey your will. Very good. His Majesty nodded. Contact the Pope. I want to borrow 2,000 Saint Warriors. If he is willing, I can agree to 2 conditions. The premise is that he must lend me the most elite Saint Warriors. In the 2 years after the chaos, he should have a lot of elites in his hands. 2,000 Saint Warriors. Molade was a little stunned. He shook his head subconsciously. You want the Holy Disarmament Corps to participate in the final battle in North Sea? That's impossible. It's hard for him to agree. Not North Sea. His Majesty narrowed his eyes. It's East Island. Don't you think that East Island is too empty now? Emperor Dong's palace, which is so empty that its strength has greatly increased, will definitely not let go of this opportunity. Similarly, the Purgatory of Heaven capital will not let go of this opportunity either. Molade's body trembled. He lowered his head, thinking about the possibility of borrowing 2,000 Saint Warriors. If it was used in the final battle in North Sea, it was almost impossible. North Sea was too sensitive now. There were Zhongzhou State, East Island, Emperor Dong's palace, the Jiang family of South America, and countless other forces involved. The eyes of the whole world fell on this place. Even if His Majesty in the Holy Land wanted to do something, it would not be convenient. After all, the Holy Disarmament Corps did not represent the dark forces. If they were unscrupulous in everything they did, there would be no need to set up a Knights Templar to deal with the affairs of the Dark World. But if 2,000 saint warriors were placed in East Island, just facing Emperor Dong's palace was equivalent to a conflict in the Dark World, which was completely different from the final battle in North Sea. 2,000 saint warriors, he muttered to himself and suddenly said, 2,000 people, is that enough? There's no other way. If the Pope agrees, 2,000 people should be his bottom line. It's impossible to add one more. His Majesty shook his head. Do you think that Emperor Dong's palace will definitely take advantage of the empty East Island to occupy the Dark World of East Island, so you want to use these 2,000 saint warriors to stop Emperor Dong's palace? Molade hesitated. But now there is more than one invincible realm expert in Emperor Dong's palace. In the final battle in North Sea, it's difficult for Situ Tsangyue and Wei Kunlun to appear in North Sea. This means that if there are no accidents, these two invincible realm experts will appear in East Island at that time. He did not make it very clear. But His Majesty understood what he meant. If Emperor Dong's palace's lineup in East Island consisted of two invincible realm experts and a large number of elites, 2,000 saint warriors would not be able to do anything at all. It doesn't matter. There's also the Purgatory of Heaven capital. I've reached an agreement with Li Kuangtu. As for the invincible realm experts, there will be at least one daybreak. His Majesty said simply. Are we going to cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital in East Island? Molade frowned and was a little worried. After all, the Purgatory of Heaven capital had once occupied the Dark World of East Island. Although it had not been a long time, it was just that they had not been exposed for a long time. Before the final battle in Heaven Capital, no one knew how long they had developed in East Island. Even if they were severely suppressed now, they would definitely have countless pawns and countless special channels. His Majesty wanted East Island, but he had to cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. This was really asking a tiger for its skin. In the end, it was very likely that he would lose everything. To deal with Emperor Dong's palace, of course, we have to cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But it's just cooperation on this matter. His Majesty laughed in a low voice. We also have Jifeng Sword Training School. In terms of influence, it is not inferior to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. So what we have to do is to secretly enter East Island in advance and make a move with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. When the forces of Emperor Dong's palace enter East Island, the two sides will work together to ambush them. Once they enter East Island, it will be difficult for them to go back alive. Molade suddenly became excited. After we get rid of Emperor Dong's palace, we'll deal with the Purgatory of Heaven capital first. Then we'll monopolize East Island. His Majesty looked at him strangely and shook his head. I don't want to fall out with Li Kuangtu yet. If everything goes well, he will withdraw from East Island. Molade was stunned and a little confused. His Majesty sighed. The Purgatory of Heaven capital entering East Island is not Li Kuangtu's decision, but his other preparation. He doesn't want to gain nothing. He promised to cooperate with us to attack Li Tianlan in Beihai, but he is also prepared for our failure in the final battle in Beihai. Although it is impossible, if we really fail, Li Kuangtu will return to East Island as soon as possible. At that time, with the failure, East Island will be greatly weakened, and he can regain control of the Dark World of East Island. But what will happen if we succeed? Have you ever thought about it? Molade took a deep breath and was speechless for a while. If they succeeded in the final battle in Beihai, it meant that their plan was extremely successful. The Wang family of Beihai would be destroyed, and Li Tianlan would die. On the battlefield of East Island, as His Majesty and Li Kuangtu entered East Island, Wei Kunlun and Situ Tsangyue would definitely die, which also meant the destruction of Emperor Dong's palace. If we succeed, Li Kuangtu will not care about East Island at all. He may be a lunatic, but he is definitely not a fool. He will know how to retreat and compromise. At that time, as long as I show my determination to take over East Island, he will not entangle himself with me, because annexing Emperor Dong's palace is the most important thing for him at that time. Now Emperor Dong's palace is different from a few days ago. If the Purgatory of Heaven capital swallows Emperor Dong's palace, it means swallowing the Flourishing Age Fund and Sai City. Such a big profit also means a big risk. Li Kuangtu will definitely do his best. So, Molade's voice was dry. At that time, Zhongzhou State will annex Beihai, Li Kuangtu will annex Tiannan, and will take over East Island. Each of us will get what we want. Not only East Island. His Majesty chuckled softly. If the plan succeeds, we'll also get Kunlun City. After that, it will be my and Li Kuangtu's era. But in the end, it's still my era. I see. Molade shook his head with a wry smile. Sure enough, I'm still suitable to follow you. This way, I don't need to think too much. His Majesty smiled and said lightly, go and contact the Holy Land. I hope that 2,000 Saint warriors can enter East Island as soon as possible. The sooner, the better. The more time we have, the more prepared we will be. I'm waiting for the 2 invincible realm experts in Emperor Dong's palace to walk into the trap and meet their doomsday. Molade nodded, turned around, and strode away. Contact Yagyu Tsangxuan. His Majesty suddenly said, tell him that I promised him. The thing that I promised him back then, the thing that he wanted to do the most, will be done soon. Molade's footsteps paused for a moment before he walked out. His Majesty had promised Yagyu Tsangxuan many things. But more importantly, there was only one thing that Yagyu Tsangxuan wanted to do the most. That was to help him get rid of the biggest traitor in Jifeng sword training school in the past 100 years at the right time. There was only one biggest traitor in Jifeng sword training school in the past 100 years. Tianhai Wuji. The master of Wuji Palace. His Majesty had promised him to kill Beihai Wuji, but only after the final battle in Beihai was over. At that time, the entire Wuji Palace would be His Majesty's own force. Chapter 9:14. After lunch, Li Kuangtu sat quietly on the balcony, leisurely making himself a cup of tea and enjoying the scenery outside the window. The air on the open-air balcony was damp and cold. The snow from a few days ago had not completely melted, and the air was filled with obvious moisture. The villa area where he lived had been for some years, and the scenery was average. Only the large garden in the center of the villa area was relatively sincere. His eyes fell on a small number of flowers that were still blooming in the winter in the garden. He was silent, and no one knew what he was thinking. The bell in the living room rang slowly, heavy and steady, marking the time. In the lingering sound of the bell, a mid-priced domestic black car slowly drove into the villa area and stopped in front of the villa where Li Kuangtu was. Li Kuangtu stood up, slightly lowered his head, and looked down. He was holding a teacup in his hand, and the steam was rising. But he stood there like an illusion. The door of the car was pushed open, and a very vigorous young man glanced around with great vigilance. Then he bent down and quickly opened the door. Chen Fangqing, wrapped in a coat, wearing a hat and sunglasses, almost covering all his features, got out of the car and walked forward quickly. The door of the villa was unlocked. He opened the door and went straight in. The car quietly stopped at the door. Neither the driver, the bodyguard, nor the secretary got out. Li Kuangtu glanced down, turned around, put down the teacup, and slowly went downstairs. Chen Fangqing had taken off his coat, hat and sunglasses, and breathed a sigh of relief with a gloomy face. Seeing Li Kuangtu come down, a smile appeared on his gloomy face, and his voice was slow, sorry to have waited for a long time. There have been a lot of things these days, so the meeting time was delayed until now. It doesn't matter, my time is not tight. Li Kuangtu, who came to Yuzhou alone, shook his head and laughed, you are the Prime Minister, but you have to be so careful when meeting. You are really cautious. Chen Fangqing's mouth twitched, and his face was a little cold. He seemed to want to say something, but finally shook his head and put a document in his hand on the tea table in the living room. It has been a troubled time recently. I don't know how many eyes are staring at me, so I can't be too cautious. He said slowly. Understandable. Li Kuangtu nodded. The matter of Haoyue Group became more and more serious. Numerous shares were acquired, and the people in the group were in a panic. What was worse was that some inside stories of Haoyue group had directly caused an earthquake in the officialdom of several provinces, which had always been regarded as the backyard garden of Prince Group. Not only that, some industries that Haoyue group was deeply involved in were constantly exposed to shady deals. Not only Qin Fangqing, but the whole Prince Group was also in a mess. Some other voices inside the Prince Group were getting louder and louder. In some private occasions, a speaker of a province even directly asked someone to stand up and take responsibility in order to reverse the current passive situation. This someone undoubtedly referred to Qin Fangqing. The Haoyue group was just one of the breakthroughs. Another breakthrough point was Qin Fangqing's daughter, Qin Lijuan. An investigation team had been stationed in a large state-owned investment group under Qin Lijuan's control the day after her accident. Although it was not a long time, after a thorough investigation, they had found countless jaw-dropping pieces of evidence. In less than 8 years when Qin Lijuan controlled the investment group, the group had lost nearly 1.6 billion. The loss of assets in Zhongzhou was extremely serious, and a considerable part of it fell into Qin Lijuan's private pocket. Moreover, although she was middle-aged, she was still very charming. Her private life was extremely exaggerated and extravagant. Only in Yuzhou, she had nearly 30 houses and more than 20 lovers. Among Qin Lijuan's 20 lovers, half of them were the leaders of Prince Group, and there were also several rich people, 2 popular male stars, and even a college student. The detailed investigation had been in-depth to the point that it could not be more detailed. The dirty tricks in the account of the investment group and the list of Qin Lijuan's lovers had once again caused significant damage to Prince Group. All the damage accumulated, Qin Fangqing's pressure could be imagined. His status was no longer a matter of stability. If it went on like this, he might immediately be abandoned by Prince Group after the election. If Prince Group could still hold on until then. Everything you want is in it. Qin Fangqing pushed the materials on the tea table to Li Guangtu and said in a deep voice, "My trump card." Li Guangtu's eyes narrowed slightly. After a moment of silence, he asked, "All of them?" "We have no choice," Qin Fangqing said faintly. With His Majesty as a lobbyist, Yuan Lin had a good talk with Li Guangtu in Tiannan. The so-called good talk did not mean that the cooperation was successful, but that Li Guangtu had no possibility of refusing the cooperation. The cooperation between Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Qin Fangqing was a great risk for both parties. Because they were plotting Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace. If he failed, needless to say, Qin Fangqing could hardly protect himself. This time, he pushed for the decisive battle in North Sea to fight desperately in a desperate situation. He had put all his chips on the line and had no way out. If he failed, his reputation would be ruined. Li Tianlan and Wang Xingshao would not let him go. He was bound to become a zhongshi. He would inevitably become the most miserable prime minister in the hundreds of years since the founding of Zhongzhou. It could be said that he would really be smashed to pieces. For Purgatory of Heaven Capital, or for Li Guangtu, the price of failure was also hard for him to bear. He participated in the decisive battle in Beihai to kill Li Tianlan. He was the heir of the Li family designated by Li Honghe. There were too many and complicated ties between the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace. Li Guangtu and Li Tianlan might be pure enemies, but the elders of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace and some generals of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would not so easily make up their minds to kill Li Tianlan. If Li Tianlan died, it would be fine. If Li Tianlan did not die, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace would completely fall out with each other. There were still a considerable number of people in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital who had not made up their minds. They were still wavering between Li Guangtu and Li Tianlan. Once the two sides fought, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would risk losing control. The risk of cooperating with Qin Fangqing was great, but the benefits after success were enough to make people crazy. Not to mention Sai City and Mount Shu, which were integrated into Emperor Dong's palace. The Flourishing Age Fund alone was enough to make the strength of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital expand to an incredible level. The annexation of Emperor Dong's palace was completely irresistible for Li Kuangtu, and it could even be said to be an overwhelming temptation. So he came to Zhongzhou State with all his trump cards. When he gave all his trump cards to Qin Fangqing, he also asked to see all Qin Fangqing's current trump cards. Knowing each other well, Li Kuangtu had a rough assessment of the worst result. As long as this assessment did not exceed his bottom line, and Qin Fangqing's trump cards ensured that he could annex Emperor Dong's palace, then the so-called cooperation was officially established. Neither side had much time to prepare. Qin Fangqing could fall at any time in the storm, and the final battle in North Sea was close at hand. So for the two who needed to make up their minds as soon as possible, all the pleasantries and probing were unnecessary. Going straight to the point was the best choice at the moment. These things can fully prove that as long as we reach an agreement, in the cooperation, as long as you can do what you can, I can do what I can. Qin Fangqing said lightly. Li Kuangtu quickly flipped through the information in his hand. The document was not long, and some of the key points had already been marked out. Although it was short, it contained all the hidden cards of a prime minister who was about to step down. Looking at it this way, the document was not too short, but too detailed. Li Kuangtu's eyes gradually lit up. He quickly flipped through and said casually, "It's amazing, but if that's all," he thought for a moment and found that he could not figure out whether these trump cards were enough or not. "Not only these, but also you." Qin Fangqing looked at him and said in a calm voice, "Both you and His Majesty need my support to achieve your goals. But similarly, after destroying North Sea and Emperor Dong's palace, I also need your support to completely stabilize the situation." Li Kuangtu was silent for a long time before he nodded and said, "In this case, there should be no problem. Your Emperor Dong's palace, and his Kunlun city." Qin Fangqing's eyes seemed to be burning with an inextinguishable flame. "My Zhongzhou State." Li Kuangtu roughly skimmed through the information and began to read it carefully. He smiled casually and said, "Do you want to completely control us?" "It's the need for balance." Qin Fangqing said seriously, "I have to make one thing clear. If you annex Emperor Dong's palace with my support, then in some aspects, you must abide by my rules, or the rules of Zhongzhou State. I'm not worried about Kunlun City. Although its system is beyond the rules on the surface, it is also the product of survival under the rules. As for Emperor Dong's palace, I don't want and will never allow your Emperor Dong's palace or the Purgatory of Heaven capital to become the second Wang family of Beihai. You can't get the same free power as the Wang family of Beihai. The political power and military power of Tiannan should be in the hands of Zhongzhou State." "It's understandable," Li Kuangtu said lightly, "but it's hard for me to accept it. In return, the Purgatory of Heaven capital can expand infinitely, and Zhongzhou State will also give you secret support when necessary." Qin Fangqing said seriously, "Zhongzhou State, you, and His Majesty, I hope to form a real win-win relationship. We can cooperate with each other and check and balance each other. Zhongzhou State doesn't need cancer, never." "Secret support," Li Kuangtu thought for a moment and asked, "What kind of support?" "Everything." Qin Fangqing said lightly, "Money, intelligence, technology, force, any kind of support." Li Kuangtu took a deep look at him. This was the order that Qin Fangqing thought about after winning the final battle. But obviously, he hadn't thought about the specific rules. This meant that after winning the final battle, there was still a lot of room for negotiation. He nodded and directly requested, "I need a portion of the elites." "What do you want to do?" Qin Fangqing frowned. "Take back East Island first, the East Island that belongs to me." "He, the East Island that belongs to us," Li Kuangtu said lightly. "East Island," Qin Fangqing frowned. "You've restricted Situ Yue and Wei Kunlun. They can't appear in Beihai, but they will definitely appear in East Island." "I need some power," Li Kuangtu said calmly. Qin Fangqing thought for a while and finally nodded. "Okay." Li Kuangtu lowered his head and looked at the information in his hand again. He stood up with a smile and reached out his hand to Qin Fangqing. "Happy cooperation." They held each other's hands tightly. There was no probing or even hesitation. When there was no way out, no matter who it was, they would show real decisiveness in the face of an opportunity. Both sides held each other's trump cards. Now, the possibility of betrayal was out of the question. In the face of huge interests, cooperation almost didn't need hesitation. The gloominess on Chen Fengqing's face disappeared little by little, and he seemed to relax a lot. "How is the preparation in Beihai going?" Li Guangtu asked. "Almost done. It will take about 10 days. Chen Fengqing smiled, and his eyes flashed with extremely cold light. He said softly, 10 days later, it will be our world." Li Guangtu nodded, and after a moment of silence, he said slowly, "I remember that Yuan Lin told me in Tiannan that before that, you want to give Li Tianlan a big gift?" Chen Fengqing raised his eyebrows. When he was about to speak, there was a sudden knock on the door. The door of the villa was open. Yuan Lin stood in front of the door with a serious face. "Come in," Chen Fengqing said in a deep voice. Yuan Lin walked in quickly, holding a photo in his hand. Li Guangtu's eyes narrowed subconsciously, and he didn't say anything. "Prime Minister." Yuan Lin walked quickly to Chen Fengqing and whispered, "The target has been locked." "Where is she?" Chen Fengqing's eyes lit up, and his voice was cold. "Huading," Yuan Lin whispered. Chen Fengqing was silent and didn't speak for a while. The other party booked a ticket to Nanyun at 9:00 in the evening. If there is no accident, she should want to go directly to Xianyuan City from Nanyun. Yuan Lin said softly, "We have investigated the surroundings. It is not a trap. Be cautious." Chen Fengqing's voice was low. "Got it." Yuan Lin nodded. Seeing that Chen Fengqing didn't give him any instructions, he took a deep breath and quietly left. He took the photo in his hand and opened the address book. He sent the photo to a number in the address book that he had never contacted. Li Guangtu looked at Yuan Lin's back and suddenly said, "Be careful, don't miss." Chen Fengqing smiled and was full of confidence. The only invincible realm killer in the dark world now takes action in person. How can he miss? Li Guangtu raised his eyebrows and didn't say much. At the same time, Huading. In the dark hotel room, Zhu, who was sitting quietly and silent, picked up the mobile phone in his hand. A photo appeared on the mobile phone. In the photo, there was a beautiful young woman. She was wearing a beige windbreaker. She had exquisite short hair and a tall figure, revealing half of her pure and enchanting side face. The background of the photo was under the lights at night. The light shone on her, and her posture was fixed in the movement of walking forward. It was a kind of indescribable quiet and hazy, with a sense of nobility and laziness. Zhu looked at the photo quietly, and his eyes were extremely hot. It was a kind of naked desire to conquer and possess that a male showed after seeing a perfect female. This photo. This side face. It was the side face of Wang Yuatong, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. The daughter of Sword Emperor and the daughter of Dong Huang. Zhu laughed nervously, and his eyes were extremely excited. The phone suddenly rang. Zhu couldn't wait to answer the phone. "Your Highness, we have locked on the target. You can take action." A steady voice sounded on the phone. "I will look for opportunities." Zhu took a deep breath and was a little impatient. "The target will fly directly to Nanyun at 9:00 tonight. We don't have much time." The steady voice reminded him. "Then let's do it at the airport." Zhu's eyes lit up. "Tell me the target's current location." Although he was excited, he didn't forget the most basic tightness. Now he lurked around the target. As the target moved, he could determine whether there were masters around her to protect her. The steady voice gave an extremely detailed address. Zhu nodded and said lightly, "I see. Help me prepare a secret place where I won't be disturbed." The voice on the phone hesitated. "This is my deal with that person." Zhu licked his lips excitedly. "We agreed that I can kill Wang Yuatong, but only if you let me play with her for a few days. His voice trembled slightly with excitement. I haven't played with a real princess yet. Ha 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 ha, this may be my only chance. Don't worry, I won't let her get out of bed alive. Chapter 9:15. The slight buzzing of the machine continued. In the dark but technology-filled hall, the light in the nutrition pod filled the foam in the pod, clearly illuminating the sleeping faces of the injured. Li Tianlan was looking at Dongqing Rushi. Situ Tsangyue was looking at Tribulation. Naylan Shuriying, with a little anxiety in her cold eyes, was carefully introducing the physical conditions of Dongqing Rushi and Tribulation. At present, His Highness's body is recovering very well. Well, this so-called, well, means that his body has begun to heal internally. Theoretically speaking, His Highness's body should be able to wake up, but his brain waves are very low. I have studied His Highness's recent data in detail. Naylan Shuriying looked at Tribulation in the nutrition pod and said in a low and hoarse voice, it seems that His Highness doesn't want to wake up. Situ Tsangyue was silent. Li Tianlan turned his eyes and looked at Tribulation in the nutrition pod. He didn't know what to say. Tribulation didn't want to wake up. Even if he woke up, what could he do? His current body was extremely fragile. Although the inside of his body had initially healed, it was still extremely weak, which meant that even if he woke up, he would not be able to move for a long time. He needed to recuperate slowly and even spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Unless the third generation of immortality developed by Naylan Shuriying came out, it was basically impossible for Tribulation to recover to the peak state. Not to mention the peak state, it was difficult for his body to recover to the standard of ordinary people. These might all be acceptable. But how could he accept Angel's death? Angel's death almost shattered all of Tribulation's perseverance and tenacity in an instant, and shattered his soul. It was better to sink in the darkness forever than to open his eyes and face the meaningless world. Situ Tsangyue was silent for a long time before she whispered, I can't accept it. Naylan Shuriying lowered her head slightly, looked at Tribulation in a coma, and said calmly, we still need some time. At present, we are discussing ways to give His Highness mental stimulation. There are about 10 specific ways. We need to eliminate them one by one and determine a way that is the least harmful to His Highness. We can slowly stimulate his spirit and wake him up. Situ Tsangyue nodded silently and said nothing. Naylan Shuriying breathed a sigh of relief. As soon as she relaxed, a bright and sharp gaze had enveloped her. An indescribable pressure seemed to fall on her in an instant. Her body stiffened slightly and she lowered her head. He said in a low voice, Your Majesty, how is Rushi? Li Tianlan asked. The corners of Naylan Shuriying's mouth twitched, but she didn't speak. She couldn't give a satisfactory answer to Li Tianlan, so she didn't know what to say at all. Tell me the truth. Li Tianlan said lightly. Her situation is the opposite of His Highness Tribulation's to some extent. Miss Dongqing's brain waves are very chaotic, and her data fluctuates greatly. Sometimes she is very active, but the biggest problem is her body. Naylan Shuriying said in a low voice, her body was completely destroyed by a huge force, and the damage was very serious. According to the information provided by you and Jade Pool, I read some data about martial arts in the database of Beihai, which roughly simulated the power of the invincible realm and the physical strength of Miss Dongqing at that time. This data is not very accurate, but it is very useful for reference. Compared with the normal power of the invincible realm and the body of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, all kinds of data show that the power of the invincible realm has caused almost irreparable damage to Miss Dongqing's body. Her recovery process will be very long. Her voice gradually deepened. How long? Li Tianlan asked. It was so long that there was almost no hope. This was what Naylan Shuriying said from the bottom of her heart. But she was very clear about the consequences of this sentence. So she was silent for a while, gritted her teeth, and whispered, it will take at least 3 more years. If it doesn't go well, it will take about 5 years. You mean, at most 5 years, Rushi can wake up, Li Tianlan said slowly. He didn't use an interrogative sentence, but a declarative sentence. Yes. Nalan Shireen gritted her teeth. At present, she was most concerned about the 3 injured people. Tribulation was one of them, but the method of mental stimulation could not determine the time. As for the other 2, one was Dongqing Rushi, and the other was the one from Worry-Free Villa. Both of them were waiting for her results, or the 3rd generation of immortality potion. 5 years, this was the bottom line she gave herself. Before this time, she must officially put the 3rd generation of immortality potion into clinical use. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. 3 to 5 years, he muttered to himself and said softly, I can wait. His voice was very soft, but it was with unconcealable hope and longing. Nalan Shireen's heart sank slightly, but she still looked calm on the surface. She just bowed slightly to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan stood where he was, took a deep look at Dongqing Rushi, and suddenly said, let's go. He glanced at Situ Tsangyue. His deputy palace master still stood there and did not speak. Li Tianlan nodded and walked into the elevator alone in silence. The elevator went all the way up to the huge and incredible castle hall. Li Tianlan stood in front of the garden in the hall for a while and slowly walked out of the castle. People came and went. The daily life of Emperor Dong's palace was full of the beauty of efficiency. Every staff member of Emperor Dong's palace who passed by Li Tianlan would bow slightly. Li Tianlan responded with a smile, and his originally low mood gradually calmed down. He liked the current atmosphere very much. Perhaps in the eyes of the real big shots, this atmosphere was very messy and noisy. But for him, who had been extremely lonely since he was a child, this was the best atmosphere. The people calling him, Your Majesty, clearly reminded him. Because everything in front of him belonged to him alone. The same huge fountain square in front of the castle was spraying water columns. The water columns gathered in the sky, showing a colorful rainbow under the sun. Li Tianlan passed by the square and sat down casually on the lawn. He looked up at the rainbow where the water columns converged and the huge black sword under the rainbow. His heart was calm and peaceful. A cheerful voice came from behind, accompanied by the crisp sound of a bell. A big golden retriever with a silver bell tied around its neck ran over happily. It squatted beside Li Tianlan and looked up at the rainbow above the square with him. The golden retriever was already very tall. When it squatted down, it was not much shorter than Li Tianlan, who was sitting. It kept adjusting the distance and finally leaned on Li Tianlan, wagging its tail with satisfaction. Li Tianlan smiled and touched its head, as if he had returned to the time when he had traveled with it for 3 years and thousands of miles. Cities, forests, deserts, and polar regions. Heavy rain, flying snow, scorching sun, and strong wind. A man and a dog, very lonely, but not lonely. Those 3 years were the quietest and most focused years in Li Tianlan's heart. Those 3 years had been imprinted in Li Tianlan's heart. It seemed to be enough for the golden retriever to be unforgettable. So when Li Tianlan returned to Tiannan and came to Emperor Dong's palace on the first day, the golden retriever directly stuck to him when it saw him. When I have time, I'll take you for a walk. Li Tianlan rubbed the golden retriever's head and said in a gentle voice. The golden retriever whimpered, lay down, turned around, and showed its belly to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan reached out and scratched its belly. He suddenly remembered that she had given him the golden retriever. His movements slowed down, and he sighed softly. Are you unhappy? The familiar delicate fragrance filled the air. Qin Weibai, who was wearing a long dress, asked softly. No. Li Tianlan shook his head. It's just, he thought about it and finally smiled. I don't know how to say it, so I won't say it. Qin Weibai hummed obediently and sat next to Li Tianlan, leaning into his arms naturally. Li Tianlan held her body and did not speak. How are Rushi and Marshal Uncle? Qin Weibai asked in a low voice. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, shook his head, and said softly, Rushi's health is very poor. Nalan said it will take at least 3 to 5 years. It's a long time, but it's not unacceptable. As long as she can recover, I can afford to wait. He took a deep breath. It's just that Martial Uncle's condition is very bad. Qin Weibai straightened up and looked at Li Tianlan. She had only met Tribulation a few times and was not familiar with him, but it did not mean that she did not care about his state. All the signs showed that, excluding the current Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan, Tribulation could be said to be the person closest to the Chosen One. This meant that if he could recover, Emperor Dong's palace would truly be invincible in the cutting-edge force. It was not as simple as being at the peak of the invincible realm, or even the so-called half-step Chosen One. He was really only half a step away from that supreme realm, or even a little bit. Tribulation was a killer, an assassin. In that state, if Tribulation hid in the dark, even the real supreme Chosen One would have to face a formidable enemy. If he could recover, Emperor Dong's palace would truly become the strongest force in the dark world. Nalan means that Martial Uncle doesn't want to wake up, Li Tianlan whispered, and his eyes were a little dazed. Actually, I can probably understand, he thought quietly, and the emotional fluctuations in his eyes gradually became intense. What are you thinking about? Qin Weibai reached out and smoothed his slightly frowning eyebrows. Nothing. Li Tianlan smiled and said softly, if I put myself in your shoes, I'm afraid I don't want to wake up if I lose you. It's probably what it's like to live a life worse than death. He reached out and held Qin Weibai tightly in his arms. Seeing Martial Uncle's state, I don't want to admit it, but I'm really scared. I can't understand Martial Uncle's psychology, but I can roughly imagine how I feel without you by my side. I can't imagine what I'll be like then. Everything in front of me seems to be meaningless. Qin Weibai's body tightened. She lowered her head slightly in Li Tianlan's arms, and her face was a little pale. After a long while, she forced a smile and said softly, I won't leave you. Her voice gradually became lower. As long as you don't drive me away. I dreamed a few days ago that you didn't want me and wanted me to leave. You were so fierce. Li Tianlan smiled and pinched Qin Weibai's ear, saying softly, no. Qin Weibai said yes and suddenly changed the topic. Military Counselor has something to report to you. Chapter 9:16. Military Counselor was now the chief financial officer of Emperor Dong's palace. This position could be said to be really high-ranking and powerful. His hidden power was not much less than that of the two deputy palace masters. It was absolutely not an exaggeration to say that he was under one person and above tens of thousands of people. But Li Tianlan didn't like Military Counselor. Or rather, he didn't like him very much. Although he brought the Flourishing Age Fund with him, he also brought some huge wealth that had not been exposed outside the Flourishing Age Fund but already belonged to Li Tianlan. But he just didn't like him. No one would like a talent who clearly had enough ability and could even be said to be at his peak but didn't want to assist him. Instead, he wanted to retire all day long. Military Counselor was such a person. Not to mention that there was no sign of his personal strength declining. Even if he was now a disabled man who couldn't hold a knife, his experience in the financial world for many years was also a valuable asset. Such a person could be said to be the soul of any force, any consortium, or even any country. But such a person always wanted to retire under Li Tianlan's command. Li Tianlan would be depressed no matter how generous he was. It was obvious that he didn't like Military Counselor, and Military Counselor didn't seem to like him very much. So now, although he was the chief financial officer of Emperor Dong's palace, he actually lived a semi-retired life. Li Tianlan needed to find a group of capable and loyal talents in a short time to take over everything of the Flourishing Age Fund. There were now some candidates to control the finance, but there was no one who could replace Military Counselor. So Military Counselor was held down by Li Tianlan. Military Counselor didn't object to anything. He seemed to have been quietly playing his role. He didn't express the slightest opinion on anything other than finance. Li Tianlan returned to Emperor Dong's palace for a few days. He had seen almost all the people he should see, but he hadn't seen Military Counselor. They didn't hate each other, but it was true that they tried to reduce the chances of meeting each other. So when he heard Qin Weibai's words, he subconsciously froze. Military counselor? Why not Han Xinyan? Han Xinyan was Han Dongluo's daughter. And now she was Li Tianlan's secretary. If the Samsara Palace had always existed and its economic power had always been hidden, when Han Donglu retired, Han Xinyan would become the new military counselor, a pure military counselor. Therefore, although she was very young, Li Tianlan had no doubt about her ability under Han Dongluo's training. Although military counselor wanted to retire, he could directly merge the flourishing age fund into Emperor Dong's palace without any tricks, which in itself showed his attitude. Making his daughter Li Tianlan's secretary was also a way out for her, and it was a bright enough road to heaven. Standing by Li Tianlan's side and taking charge of the overall affairs of Emperor Dong's palace, this perspective and this platform was undoubtedly the broadest. In fact, Han Xinyan was the only candidate to replace the military counselor in the future. Of course it's something important. There are a lot of things that he doesn't want his daughter to know. This can be considered a kind of protection. But Xinyan is your secretary now, so she will know some things eventually. Qin Weibai leaned against Li Tianlan, her voice languid. It's unnecessary. Li Tianlan frowned. Since you want to protect her, why did you ask her to be my secretary? Qin Weibai hesitated. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and pulled Qin Weibai's soft earlobe. Don't move. Qin Weibai's body was a little soft, and she got rid of Li Tianlan's hand. She sighed and said with a smile, military counselor is very cautious. In the Samsara Palace, he represents the wealth and intelligence of the Samsara Palace. All the operations in the dark are planned and executed by him. Palace Master can give him complete trust in the beginning. In terms of wealth, this is something on the surface, so Han Xinyan will definitely get in touch with this area. But now the Samsara Palace has become Emperor Dong's palace, and you are the Palace Master. He is not sure if you have enough trust in him. He doesn't let Han Xinyan get in touch with things other than the Flourishing Age Fund because he is afraid that you will suspect him and his daughter. This is his protection for his daughter. Even if you want Xinyan to be the new military counselor in the future and let her get in touch with the intelligence system other than the Flourishing Age Fund, and even that saber, such a decision should be made by you. Xinyan will know something only if you agree. If you don't, with military counselor's cautiousness, how can he take the initiative to tell his daughter these things? Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He said softly, in the end, he still doesn't treat me as one of his own. That's normal. Qin Weibai said softly, but you can treat Xinyan as one of your own. Not to mention military counselor, even I am not sure about your position for Xinyan. Do you want her to become the next military counselor or a pure chief financial officer? As a personal secretary, as long as you want, she can get in touch with a lot of things. What do you think? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. Facing her man, Qin Weibai naturally would not avoid anything. She reached out and touched the golden retriever lying obediently in front of them. She said with a smile, if it's the chief financial officer, Han Xinyan is very qualified. It can even be said that she can replace military counselor now. But if you want her to be the new military counselor, I'm afraid it will take some time to train her. Li Tianlan touched his pocket, took out a cigarette, lit it, took a deep breath, and shook his head. There is no other way. Emperor Dong's palace has a lot of things, but it has always been short of manpower. It is better to train her than to have no candidate. Qin Weibai bit her lower lip and did not speak. In fact, she had a better candidate in mind. If he agreed to join Emperor Dong's palace, he would be more than enough to be Li Tianlan's personal secretary to coordinate the overall situation, military counselor to control the remaining forces of Samsara Palace, or deputy palace master. But now Li Tianlan might not be able to afford it. Flaming Fire, who had been with her for a long time, was undoubtedly the most suitable candidate. She smiled and shook her head subconsciously. Flaming Fire and military counselor were the same. If she was willing to come back, military counselor would not want to retire. After all, she could not let go. Let him come over, Li Tianlan said, with Han Xinyan. This was undoubtedly a kind of attitude. Not to military counselor, but to Han Xinyan. Qin Weibai said yes, took out her mobile phone, and sent a message. Li Tianlan held a cigarette and looked down at the golden retriever lying in front of him with squinted eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Military counselor and Han Xinyan came quickly. Just after smoking a cigarette, the father and daughter appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Your Majesty. Han Xinyan bowed slightly. Military counselor just nodded casually. Li Tianlan glanced at him and asked directly, what's the matter? Military counselor hesitated a little and glanced at his daughter beside him. She is my secretary. There is nothing in Emperor Dong's palace that she can't know. Your caution is meaningless, Li Tianlan said blandly. Military counselor smiled calmly and did not hide his little thoughts at all. Looking at Li Tianlan's eyes, he thought for a moment and said calmly, well, Your Majesty, after knowing the termination plan and Your Majesty's attitude, we made some arrangements. Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly focused. He knew who the main target of the termination plan was, so he was completely focused. You? Military counselor quickly glanced at Qin Weibai out of the corner of his eye. Qin Weibai lowered her head and reached out to gently pull the golden retriever's folded ears. The golden retriever shook its head and tail very happily. Saint and I, military counselor said calmly. Tell me the details. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and said blandly. Military counselor took out his mobile phone from his pocket and sent a video. The video was quickly connected. He handed the mobile phone to Li Tianlan and said softly, it's best for her to talk to you. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows, took the mobile phone casually, and glanced at the screen. On the screen was a young face. It was a beautiful face that looked extremely pure but had a hint of enchanting charm. Li Tianlan was instantly stunned. He looked at the screen, and his eyes were a little dazed. Your Majesty, I'm hallucinating. The woman's voice was a little hoarse and sounded extremely sexy. Li Tianlan stared at the face that belonged to Wang Yuetong that he hadn't seen for a long time. The moment he saw her, Li Tianlan was sure that she was not Wang Yuetong. That kind of respect and uneasiness could never appear on Wang Yuetong's face. But this face was too similar, almost exactly the same as Wang Yuetong's. Hallucinating is good at disguise and camouflage, and has reached the top level in this aspect. I'm afraid no one can see the flaws except Miss Yuetong's relatives. Military counselor said softly, so we made her disguise as Miss Yuetong and played a game. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. Go on. Your Majesty, I'm in Huading. Hallucinating said softly, we deliberately released the news. What is certain is that as early as a few days ago, someone had already targeted me, but the other party was very cautious and didn't seem to be sure whether it was a trap or not. I have booked a ticket to Nanyun tonight. A few days is enough for them to confirm that there are no masters around me to protect me. My whereabouts to Nanyun are very obvious. They should know that this is their last chance to carry out the final plan, so, there should be a big fish on the hook tonight. Li Tianlan gently raised the corner of his mouth with a faint smile. How big is the fish? Probably the invincible realm. Military counselor took over the conversation. We got the news that the only invincible realm killer in the dark world is now in Zhongzhou state, even in Huading. He looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, Your Majesty, before the final battle in North Sea, maybe we can make the other party lose an invincible realm expert first. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and was silent for a while. Then he said lightly, prepare the plane, let's go to Huading. Okay. As Li Tianlan's secretary, Han Xinyan was the first to speak. In addition, inform the Huading parliament that Zhu is in Huading and his purpose is unknown. Let them find him. Han Xinyan hesitated for a moment and said softly, Your Majesty. The speaker of Huading. Of course, Li Tianlan was the speaker of Huading and one of the leaders of the Prince group. He nodded casually. I know, go ahead. Chapter 9:17. The sunlight shone in through the window. On the marble table with several exquisite desserts, there were confidential documents issued by the Parliament of Zhongzhou State in the past year. The contents of the documents were numerous, including policies of Zhongzhou State, diplomatic guidelines, internal affairs rectification. All kinds of information were turned into words and printed clearly on the paper. The seemingly soft and petite palm gently stroked the documents in front of her. The places where her jade-like fingers occasionally stopped were basically the key parts of the documents. She sat quietly, with one side of her body facing the sunlight outside the window. Under the light, it was an extremely delicate and dreamy but extremely immature face. The documents were flipped through little by little, and soon they came to the last one. This was a confidential document issued by the Parliament of Zhongzhou State 3 days ago, which was limited to the leaders at the level of parliamentarians of Zhongzhou State. The level of parliamentarians of Zhongzhou State. In the entire Zhongzhou State, there were no more than 30 parliamentarians. This also meant that even the speakers of most provinces in Zhongzhou State were not qualified to read this document, which was not very long. The document was not printed but handwritten. President Li Huaqing personally wrote it and signed his own name, which showed the importance of this document. The document was not long, and the central idea was extremely simple. In the name of the president, Li Huaqing asked Zhongzhou State to maintain absolute stability in all aspects. He hoped that everyone could focus on the overall situation. In the current situation, unity was more important than anything else. The document was repeated more than 1,000 times. However, sensitive words such as stability, unity, and the overall situation were repeated dozens of times. Because of these keywords, the plain document seemed to have a shocking power. In the sunlight, the somewhat blurred but almost perfect immature face gradually tightened. Her brows furrowed little by little. Uncle Zhong, is something big going to happen? It was the voice of a young girl. It was clear and cold, but it was incomparably pleasing to the ears. Her voice was neither fast nor slow, with an indescribable calmness and quietness, like a clear spring, clear without any impurities. Opposite the girl, Zhong Yongming, who was reading the written report of his subordinate behind the desk, was slightly stunned, and then smiled. Why do you ask? The president has been emphasizing unity, the overall situation, and stability. My teacher once told me that the more something is repeatedly emphasized, the more it shows that this thing is actually very fragile. The girl looked at Zhong Yongming quietly, and her voice was clear and indifferent. Is the overall situation of Zhongzhou State very fragile? Zhong Yongming looked into the girl's eyes and felt that it was ridiculous. As a senior member of parliament in Zhongzhou State and the speaker of Huading, he had seen countless people in his life. The girl had a pair of incredibly beautiful eyes, but what made him feel even more ridiculous was the seriousness and confusion in her eyes, as well as the keenness of her mind. The girl had been staying in his house for a few days. Zhong Yongming had never heard of her name before. But this girl, who was as beautiful as the most delicate doll, was accompanied by 4 terrifyingly powerful bodyguards on her first visit to Huading. 3 were at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and 1 was a half-step invincible realm expert. In today's dark world, this lineup could even wipe out some medium-sized dark forces. As the girl entered Huading, he received a call from Gu Xingyun in person. On the phone, Gu Xingyun said that this girl named Gu Xianyan was his student and also his goddaughter. He hoped that Zhong Yongming could take good care of her. For some reason, or perhaps it was the so-called unity, stability, and the overall situation. Zhong Yongming agreed to Gu Xingyun's request and simply handed over the girl and his 4 companions. The bodyguards took them to the director's compound of Huading. He was the speaker of Huading and occupied the largest and most luxurious building in the councillor's compound. It was not a problem for a few people to live there. After a few days of interaction, Zhong Yongming roughly understood the current situation of this 15-year-old girl. This trip to Huading could be said to be Gu Xianyan's first time in the secular world. However, she did not know what she should do. She was like a little girl who was lost about her future. However, unlike the confusion of ordinary people, although she couldn't find her direction for the time being, she was extremely clear-headed. The first person she came into contact with after entering the secular world was the speaker of Huading. This starting point was not low, so she instinctively seized the opportunity and began to get in touch with some things she could not get in Kunlun City. The confidential documents of the parliament, the institutional structure of Huading, the military and political structure of Zhongzhou State, the specific status of Kunlun City in Zhongzhou State, and the specific meaning of Zhong Yongming, the Zhongzhou counselor, in Zhongzhou State. The girl had always maintained an extremely proactive attitude while staying in Zhong Yongming's home. She would often ask Zhong Yongming questions of all kinds, and occasionally, she would see Zhong Yongming receiving guests or subordinates in the study. She almost instinctively absorbed everything that could be absorbed in the strange environment, no matter good or bad. Zhong Yongming had no intention of evaluating Gu Xianyan's various behaviors, but he did not need any so-called intuition. He was now sure that the little girl in front of him would definitely be a very terrible person when she grew up in the future. Because of her behavior in the past few days. Her behavior was very proactive, even with some aggressiveness that she herself was not aware of. But in general, her behavior was not too out of line. Her mind was sharp, her heart was calm, and her instincts were terrible. These might be what made her different. But the most important thing was that Zhong Yongming clearly knew that this girl was different, but he unconsciously lowered his guard against her in the past few days. For example, now, he took out all the confidential documents and reviewed some reports from various departments of Huading in the study, leaving Gu Xianyan to stay here. About 10 minutes later, there would be a conversation between him and the deputy speaker of Huading. This was a very strange feeling. Zhong Yongming knew that he should not be like this. The other party was indeed just a girl. But she was Gu Xingyun's student and adopted daughter. This identity alone was enough to make Zhong Yongming wary of her. Although the Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group were both in troubled times, and the two groups would work closely together again in the face of difficulties, no matter how reliable the allies were, they were not on the same side after all. Moreover, the girl was different enough. Although she was confused, she had shown a certain degree of maturity. It was impossible for anyone here to be defenseless against her. But Zhong Yongming was not on guard. Maybe there was at the beginning, but it soon disappeared. Zhong Yongming himself did not know when it disappeared. Not only that, the documents he personally brought to the other party even contained some internal decisions of the Prince Group. Zhong Yongming himself could not tell why, but he felt that it was very natural to get along with this little girl. It was like getting along with the younger generation of his family. All his vigilance slowly disappeared in the short time they got along, and finally turned into emotion. He did not know the existence of Gu Xianyan before. But now seeing her, he had a very clear intuition that the girl in front of him would be even more important than Gu Hanshan and Li Qingqing in the future. It's not too serious. Thinking silently, he shook his head subconsciously and lit a cigarette subconsciously. He said subconsciously, it's true that the interior of Zhongzhou State is not very peaceful. It's mainly our side, well, and my adoptive father's side. We are in a lot of trouble at present. The president's position has changed now. He demands stability and unity. It seems that he has made up his mind. What determination? Gu Xianyan blinked her eyes. Her eyes were bright and dreamy, as deep as an incomparably gorgeous starry sky. He's going to attack us, right? Prime Minister. Zhong Yongming narrowed his eyes. But it shouldn't be so fast. There is still the decisive battle in Beihai, which is our last hope. But the signal has been clearly expressed in the president's document. Gu Xianyan listened quietly and did not speak. Zhong Yongming said for a while, then suddenly laughed and said, "Little girl, do you understand?" "I don't understand, but I will write it down." Gu Xianyan chuckled, walked to the table, took the pen in Zhong Yongming's hand, took out a piece of white paper and began to record. It looked like a letter. But it was messy. The girl had a good memory. She wrote down some sensitive information that she had come into contact with during this period of time. She didn't care whether it was useful or not. Anyway, someone would filter it. Some internal decisions and discussions of the Prince Group were written down by her. In addition, some things about Kunlun City were also written down by her seriously. She thought and wrote carefully, and the content of the letter became longer and longer. Zhong Yongming chuckled and didn't care. He lowered his head and continued to read the documents. I've got it. I'm going out to play. After Gu Xianyan finished writing the letter, she put down the pen and ran out of the study happily. Zhong Yongming looked at her back and a doting smile appeared on his face. The young figure trotted all the way downstairs. In the living room downstairs, her 2 bodyguards were watching TV. She had 4 bodyguards. They worked in 2 shifts 24 hours a day. They protected her all day long. Even in the council compound, they didn't relax their vigilance at all. Seeing Gu Xianyan running down, the 2 bodyguards stood up subconsciously and said respectfully, Mississippi. Gu Xianyan nodded, found an envelope, put the letter in it, and handed it to one of the bald men. She chuckled and said, Uncle Ghostfire, there's a letter here that needs to be delivered. Okay. The bald man didn't hesitate and took the envelope directly. Where should I deliver it? Do you know the Flourishing Age Fund? Gu Xianyan blinked. Ghostfire's face didn't change. He thought for a moment and nodded. Yes, send it to the Flourishing Age Fund. No, it's the owner of a dessert shop opposite the Flourishing Age Fund. Gu Xianyan stretched out her finger and gently touched the corner of her soft lips. Tell him that Xiaohua gave it to him. Well, I like the desserts there very much. Buy more for me. Ghostfire nodded and went out directly. Gu Xianyan watched his back leave, and her eyes flickered slightly. Her eyes became brighter and brighter, but they were extremely quiet and deep like an abyss. Ghostfire went out the door, started the car, and slowly disappeared. Gu Xianyan smiled and found 2 controllers at the side. She handed one to the bodyguard who had been sitting still at the side and said with a smile, We're playing games. Sol Dolua, okay. The bodyguard nodded with a smile and suddenly asked, Miss, where's Ghostfire? Ah. Gu Xianyan replied casually, I want to eat dessert. Ask Uncle Ghostfire to help me buy some. The bodyguard picked up the controller, nodded, and replied, Oh. Chapter 9:18. He met several subordinates, reviewed some documents, made some comments on the next year's development plan of a jurisdiction in Huading, and transferred some documents to the municipal government. When he was about to finish his work, the phone suddenly rang. Zhong Yongming, who was already thinking about dinner, frowned slightly, thought about it, and answered the phone. Speaker, it's me, Zheng Yi. On the other side of the phone, a steady voice sounded, speaking at a faster speed. Zhong Yongming narrowed his eyes and said yes. Zheng Yi was one of the councillors of Huading's parliament. The position of Secretary-General meant that he was Zhong Yongming's absolute confidant. Among the 13 councillors of Huading, Zheng Yi was the youngest one, but he was extremely capable. Huading had changed 2 mayors in recent years, but he had a good relationship with the parliament and the municipal government. As the chief steward of the parliament, Zhong Yongming didn't have to worry about trouble in his backyard. I received a message from the city hall of Xianyuan City. Zheng Ye's voice was low and solemn. Where? Zhong Yongming was stunned for a moment and asked subconsciously. The city hall of Xianyuan City. Zheng Yi said calmly. This was a very official notification. Although Xianyuan City was not comparable to Huading, its location was special enough. If it was a private message, Emperor Dong's palace could directly contact Zhong Yongming. If it was a semi-official communication, Ning Qiancheng, the mayor of Xianyuan City, could also directly contact Zhong Yongming. But now, the city hall directly contacted the Secretary-General of Huading. Why was it so formal? Zhong Yongming's face darkened for a moment. The knot between him and Li Tianlan was not a secret. In just a few years, Li Tianlan directly rushed from insignificance to the peak of the dark world. It was said that Li Tianlan in Emperor Dong's palace had even become His Majesty. But for Zhong Yongming, the Li Tianlan in his memory always seemed to be the person who knelt by his son's bed and apologized calmly, and then killed his son in the most cruel way in the shortest time. Zhong Yongming couldn't forget this kind of blood feud. Although he had more than one son, he only had one legitimate son, and it was not easy to put the other two illegitimate sons in the light. But the son he paid the most attention to was killed by Li Tianlan. Of course he wanted revenge. In the past 2 years, Zhong Yongming had done his best to cooperate with the Prince Group's suppression of the Giant Group. The only pity was that he didn't completely crush the Giant Group. Now Li Tianlan was at his peak. No matter how much he hated him, even if he was a senior member of Zhongzhou State, he had to avoid him for the time being. Zhong Yongming did not speak for a long time as he held the phone. In the past 2 years, he had made great efforts to cooperate with the Prince Group, and the most important thing was that he had little to do with Qin Fangqing. The speaker of Huading was indeed powerful, but he was not satisfied with his current position. He had been operating in secret. He wanted to go further after the election and become a director in the highest position in Zhongzhou State. So far, he seems to be doing pretty well. The only variable was that he didn't know how much loss Li Tianlan's counterattack would bring to the Prince Group. If he could get in touch with Li Tianlan now and show some sincerity, he silently thought that this matter might not bring him any benefits, but at least it wouldn't bring him any harm. When the election was over, he would go further and teach Emperor Dong's palace a lesson. Zhong Yongming took a deep breath. What happened in Xianyuan City? They conveyed the inside information of Emperor Dong's palace to Huading. Zheng Yi said solemnly, they have enough evidence to show that the only invincible realm killer in the dark world, Zhu, is in Huading now. His purpose is unknown. Emperor Dong's palace asked us to conduct a detailed investigation. It is said that His Majesty Li Tianlan. Well, His Highness Li Tianlan is already on his way here. Zhu. Invincible realm? Zhong Yongming's face changed, and he suddenly became cautious. The invincible realm was the peak power in the dark world. It was the absolute top force in any country. An invincible realm expert meant too many things. It could be huge and unimaginable benefits, or it could be huge and unimaginable losses. An invincible realm expert who did not belong to Zhongzhou State lurking in Huading was trouble for anyone. This matter could even be reported to the Parliament of Zhongzhou State. It's an invincible realm killer. Zheng Yi reminded him. This reminder was undoubtedly more deterrent. No matter when, the killer hiding in the dark was the most troublesome. When the killer was still in the invincible realm, he was almost a nightmare. What's his purpose? Zhong Yongming was a little confused and asked subconsciously. Zheng Yi did not say anything. Just as Qin Fangqing could not tell Zhong Yongming about Zhu, Emperor Dong's palace would not tell him Zhu's purpose. It was enough to keep them nervous. Zhong Yongming took a deep breath and lit a cigarette. His expression became very careful. It was not that he was too sensitive, nor did he think too highly of himself. In his opinion, in the whole of Huading, he was the only one qualified to be the target of an invincible realm killer. The position of Speaker of Huading was secondary. As a member of Zhongzhou State, he could be said to be one of the real leaders of Zhongzhou State. As for other people, an invincible realm killer might not be interested in them. Did he come for him? But, why? Was he sick? He rubbed his forehead with a headache and suddenly said, Is Li Tianlan on his way here? Zheng Yi hesitated and said, Yes, they seem to pay a lot of attention to Zhu. Zhong Yongming stood there and was silent for half a minute. Then he suddenly said, Prepare the car and inform Mayor Wu. Well, inform all the councillors of Huading. We're going to pick him up. This, Zheng Yi was slightly shocked. Not to mention the blood feud between Zhong Yongming and Li Tianlan, even if they were very close, this kind of etiquette was too respectful. Do as I say. Zhong Yongming said in a deep voice. Being afraid of the invincible realm killer was secondary. The most important thing was that he could also take this opportunity to show his sincerity by being close to the strong in the face of unknown danger. If he could reach some tacit understanding with Li Tianlan in this matter, then this matter would undoubtedly be worth it. Okay, I'll inform them right away. Zheng Yi directly hung up the phone. Zhong Yongming took a deep breath, stood up straight, washed his face, and hung off his beard. A few minutes later, he slowly walked to the living room downstairs in a well-ironed suit, looking energetic and young. The driver and secretary were already waiting outside. Gu Xianyan was sitting in the living room and studying several desserts. Two bodyguards at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm were playing games with controllers. It seemed that they had played for too long and looked a little dull. Uncle Zhong. Gu Xianyan looked up at him. She smiled sweetly and picked up a piece of colorful cake with her small hand. Are you going out? Yes. Zhong Yongming took the cake and took a bite. Thinking of his purpose, a cold hatred flashed across his eyes, but then he shook his head helplessly and said with a smile, a big shot is coming to Huading, and I'm going to meet him. A big shot. Gu Xianyan blinked her watery and clear eyes. Is it the president? Zhong Yongming ate the cake and touched her head with the other hand with a smile. Not only the president is a big shot. In such a big Zhongzhou state, there are many big shots. But there shouldn't be many who deserve you to show up in person. Gu Xianyan's smile was sweet and dreamy. It's different this time. Zhong Yongming gritted his teeth slightly. He obviously did not agree with the title of His Majesty East Emperor, which had gradually spread in the Dark World and tried to be on par with Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong. He smiled sarcastically and said, this time it's the Palace Lord of Emperor East Palace. Ah. Gu Xianyan let out a soft cry. Her bright eyes flashed with a strange light, and she said softly, His Majesty Li Tianlan. Zhong Yongming frowned but didn't say anything. Gu Xianyan's eyes turned a little blurred. If there was no accident, the letter she had just written should be opened in the dessert shop and then sent to the chairman's office of the Flourishing Age Fund as soon as possible. But she didn't know if that luck would appear in front of Li Tianlan. That letter, in her opinion, was very important. She thought silently, and suddenly said in a clear voice, Uncle, can I go and have a look? What are you going to see? Zhong Yongming was a little stunned. To see the Palace Lord of Emperor East Palace. Gu Xianyan was a little longing. I heard that he is the most legendary figure in the Dark World in recent years. I haven't seen him yet. Zhong Yongming looked at her for a while and shook his head with a smile. Then let's go. Gu Xianyan nodded hard, and two extremely attractive blushes seemed to rise on her small face because of excitement. The delicate and perfect sister who seemed to be not a person of the mortal world let the old man take her into Kunlun City. At that time, the Samsara Palace still existed. Emperor East Palace was still East Emperor Palace. The sister surnamed Qin told her that she was from East Emperor Palace. East Emperor Palace had now become Emperor East Palace. As a member of Emperor East Palace, she had not seen any important figure in the organization. And now she was about to see the most legendary young palace lord. For her, this was simply the mood of a pilgrimage. With two bodyguards, she got into the number 1 car of Huading. She looked in the direction of the airport, full of expectation. The directors of Huading's counselors' compound were all notified. In the afternoon sun, led by Zhong Yongming's number 1 car, more than a dozen cars representing the top power of Huading slowly drove out of the counselor's compound and headed for the airport. Gu Xianyan was a little expectant. In the repressed resentment and killing intent, Zhong Yongming was also a little expectant. As the only invincible realm killer in the Dark World today, he was also looking forward to it. A shadow appeared in the crowded airport. The shadow, like a breeze, circled around every corner of the airport at a very fast speed. He walked casually in the airport hall. Looking at the peaceful hall, he chuckled. He secretly checked the flight situation and confirmed the flight to Tiannan at 9:00 in the evening and the boarding gate. Out of caution, he quickly checked again. The airport was still peaceful. The area around the boarding gate was the same as usual. Zhu smiled with satisfaction. He had checked the hotel where the target was and even the road when he came. Entering the airport a few hours in advance also made him sure that the environment was safe. This also meant that the sudden appearance of the target was not a trap. If it was not a trap, he could take action. He found a place near the confirmed boarding gate and sat down. The slightly distorted space completely concealed his body. He stretched as if there was no one else around and looked at his watch. There were still a few hours left. The boring waiting was boring. But he was very excited. Because in his heart, the next night would be a very wonderful night. Chapter 9:19. When the urgent phone rang, Chen Fangqing, who was just a little sleepy, opened her eyes in a daze. He lay on the bed in a daze. His mind seemed to still have the vague dream he had when he was half asleep and half awake. The phone kept ringing. He lay there in a daze for a while. When the phone rang for the second time, he finally picked up the call. Yuan Lin's voice sounded on the other end of the phone, hurried and solemn. Prime Minister, there's news from Huading. Chen Fangqing's body shook, and his confusion and drowsiness disappeared in an instant. He immediately sat up on the bed, enduring the dizziness in his head, and subconsciously looked at his watch. Isn't the flight at 9:00 in the evening? He frowned. You succeeded so quickly. You definitely didn't choose to take action at the airport? Yuan Lin paused and said, no, it's the news from the Huading Parliament. His mind seemed to be in a mess. Xianyuan City, no, Emperor Dong's palace has discovered Zhu's whereabouts and even knows his purpose. Li Tianlan is already on his way to Huading. Huading's parliament, the city hall of Xianyuan City has informed Huading's parliament and announced the news of Zhu. Li Tianlan asked Huading's parliament to investigate Zhu's whereabouts. Chen Fangqing felt a wave of disappointment. He frowned deeply, and his original joy slowly disappeared, replaced by a headache again. He rubbed his forehead hard and said in a hoarse voice, how did Emperor Dong's palace know about this? The Terminator plan was still going on. It was just that the elite of the Prince Group had become the killer of the invincible realm. This was carried out in an extremely secretive environment. Apart from Zhu himself, there were only 3 people who knew that Zhu was in Huading. The person in charge was Chen Fangqing, Yuan Lin, who was in charge of external communication, and the mysterious emperor. Wang Qinglei and even Wang Xiaoyao knew that Zhu was ready to take action. But out of some consideration or vigilance, they did not know that Zhu was now in Huading. Chen Fangqing himself would not announce anything to the public. His Majesty wouldn't either. Yuan Lin had no reason to betray him. Then how did the news leak out? Yuan Lin was silent for a while before he finally smiled bitterly. I don't know. Chen Fangqing believed that Yuan Lin really did not know. He gripped his phone tightly and looked at the sunset outside the window. No one knew what he was thinking. What did Zhong Yongming say? He suddenly asked. Cooperate. Yuan Lin's tone was calm, without any emotion. Speaker Zhong has given the Special Operations Bureau of Huading, all the special warfare squads and special forces. The armed police and special police have issued a search order. He doesn't know Zhu's purpose, so he must have misunderstood something. Prime Minister, do you want me to contact Speaker Zhong and give him a hint? The corner of Chen Fangqing's mouth twitched. He stretched out his hand and punched his eyes lightly. He said lightly, no need. Everything will end tonight. Yuan Lin was silent for a few seconds and seemed a little surprised. It will all end tonight, do you have a different opinion? Chen Fangqing got off the bed, intending to boil some water to make herself a pot of tea. The reason why he had started to rest in the afternoon was to wait for the good news in the evening. Then, he would make a good article based on Wang Yuedong's death and make emergency deployments to start the decisive battle in Beihai in the shortest time. Now that he was awake, he simply did not sleep. Yuan Lin pondered for a moment. I think we should ask Zhu to cancel this action. After all, Li Tianlan is on his way. According to the schedule, he should arrive in Huading soon before 9:00 in the evening. Chen Fengqing paused and asked, "It seems that Zhu wants to kill Wang Yuetong." "It seems," Yuan Lin pondered the meaning of this word and braced himself. "Yes. It's not killing Li Tianlan. Why are you so nervous? Is Wang Yuetong already in the invincible realm?" "Zhu is an invincible realm killer. Wang Yuetong can't resist it. Zhu will succeed in an instant. Even if he is no match for Li Tianlan, an invincible realm killer who is good at hiding can't escape, can't he? What are you thinking? Or is this what Zhu himself wants? Such a cowardly invincible realm killer." Chen Fengqing's tone was fast, with obvious dissatisfaction. Yuan Lin paused. For some reason, he always thought of the flying snow floating in front of the Cabinet Public Affairs Office. The flying snow, like a sword, instantly covered Chen Lijuan's body with endless sharpness. At that moment, it seemed that every snowflake in the whole world carried Li Tianlan's will. He opened his mouth and said with a bitter smile, "No, Zhu doesn't know about this. Don't tell him." Chen Fengqing said lightly, "He has always coveted Wang Yuetong. When he catches Wang Yuetong, he will definitely retreat as soon as possible. Even if Li Tianlan keeps an eye on her and he can't take her away, it won't be difficult to kill her." Yuan Lin gave a muffled, Chen Fengqing directly hung up the phone and sat down in the chair. He looked at the setting sun outside the window and waited quietly, motionless. The night swallowed up the fiery afterglow of the setting sun. The sky above Huading Airport gradually darkened. The bright lights gradually lit up. Zhong Yongming got out of his car and looked along the long runway in front of him all the way to the sky. There was only a corner of the setting sun on the horizon. The faint light illuminated a small part of the sky into orange, quiet and beautiful. The 13 directors of Huading followed Zhong Yongming out of the car and stood behind him, waiting silently. Everyone's face was extremely solemn. An invincible realm killer was enough to make them, who stood at the peak of power in Huading, uneasy. Even if the target was not them, how could an invincible realm killer assassinate an ordinary person? As long as the other party succeeded, it almost meant that the situation in Huading and even the situation in Zhongzhou State would be turbulent. Such turbulence could never be a good thing for them. Therefore, although the 13 directors had their own standpoints, at least at this moment, when Zhu was lurking in Huading, they welcomed Li Tianlan, who came specially for Zhu. They were also willing to come to the airport to pick him up. Zhong Yongming looked at the sky in the distance with no expression and waited quietly. Gu Xianyan stood beside him, holding his hand quietly. No one knew what she was thinking. A spot of light appeared in the night sky in the distance. The spot of light shone and became more and more obvious. "He's coming." Zhong Yongming's voice was low. Thinking of the mortal enemy who killed his son, he had mixed feelings. Everyone subconsciously straightened their backs. The roar of the engine came from far away in the air. The flashing spot of light dived toward the ground and turned into a huge flying silhouette in the gradually dimming sky. It slowly lowered its altitude, getting lower and lower. Bang! In some dull sounds, the small private plane in the air landed on the ground. The friction of the tires on the runway created tiny sparks. The plane glided on the ground and gradually slowed down. Zhong Yongming subconsciously tightened his body. He could disdain Li Tianlan in his heart and despise the way His Majesty called him. But when he really faced the young man, he did feel great pressure in his heart, although he did not want to admit it. The young man, who was less than 25 years old, was indeed a powerful figure who stood at the peak of Zhongzhou State and the dark world. He took a deep breath. The plane was getting slower and slower on the runway. Zhong Yongming walked over slowly with the directors of Huading. The plane stopped, the cabin door opened, and the gangway slowly descended. Zhong Yongming raised his head and stood on the ground, looking up at the direction of the gangway. Gu Xianyan stared at the cabin door, unwilling to do any details. The first thing that rang at the cabin door was a series of bells. It was crisp and sweet. That was the sound made by the bell in the slight shaking. In everyone's sight, a furry and charmingly naive head popped out. Seeing that everyone had been staring at it, it seemed to be startled. It opened its mouth and subconsciously barked, which then turned into a small whimper. It seemed to want to lie down and lower its head to lick its claws. A gust of cold wind suddenly blew across the empty airport. The cold wind blew the hair of the golden retriever in the cabin, rushed out of the cabin, and blew on the 13 directors. Then the sound spread wildly into the distance. A young figure in a black trench coat appeared at the cabin door. It could not be considered a handsome face. It was not a tall figure. He stood quietly at the cabin door, looking in the direction of the cold wind, and narrowing his eyes. At that moment, the figure gave everyone an indescribable feeling. The wind blew into the distance, and his aura became extremely real in an instant. High in the sky, the night, the plane, the lights, and the crowd. Everything seemed to have completely disappeared. Or in other words, it completely lost the color it should have. It became blurred, false, and illusory. Only he stood there with the golden retriever, and the reality became the most intense color in the world. He still didn't look handsome or tall, but in a false world, this real figure had a completely indescribable elegance. Holding the dog, he seemed to raise his eyebrows and take a step forward. An invisible wind blew through the night again. His footsteps didn't stop as he walked down the stairs step by step. The invisible wind became sharp, real, and violent. There seemed to be endless sharpness sweeping through the whole world, covering the entire airport in an instant. The 2 bodyguards at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm near Gu Xianyan trembled violently and almost knelt down directly. In their perception, the extremely sharp sword energy filled every inch of space in the airport, as if it was probing and looking for something. In the airport lobby, Gate 9. In the distance, the invisible sword energy flew directly over with a weak airflow. Wu Ju seemed to be stunned. The next second, he suddenly raised his head in disbelief. The domain of the invincible realm that hit his figure was directly broken in the illusory wind. At that moment, it seemed that the whole world suddenly quieted down. The majestic sword energy seemed to have determined the target in an instant. Li Tianlan walked down the gangway with no expression on his face. Zhong Yongming took a deep breath and forced a smile to greet him. He hesitated for a second and finally decided to address Li Tianlan. "Your Highness," Li Tianlan still moved forward with no expression on his face. His figure took a step on the flat ground. He disappeared in front of everyone in an instant. The chain holding the golden retriever lost its support and fell down. Zhong Yongming was stunned for a moment and subconsciously reached out to catch the chain. In front of the boarding gate, Wu Ju suddenly stood up. The unparalleled danger stimulated his whole body, and his physical instincts seemed to be screaming constantly. Death was approaching quickly. Without any hesitation, his domain kept compressing and hiding his body. He stood up straight on his knees and planned to escape without hesitation. The other party found him. He didn't know who the other party was, but the idea was extremely clear. His body slightly exerted force. In an instant, everyone in the entire airport heard a wild roar that filled the sky and earth. It was an extremely loud sound of wind, but it was extremely sharp and sharp. The tall glass window of the airport was completely broken in an instant. The debris was flying all over the sky. Everyone raised their heads in shock. Everything in front of them seemed to be torn to pieces by an invisible sword. The light was messy and covered everything in the airport. There was crazy surging light everywhere. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in front of Wu Ju in the shining light. He punched. He clenched his fist casually, but the condensed power was like a heavy cannon. In the blink of an eye, the surging sword energy all over the sky seemed to have found a condensing point. Like a monstrous tide, the sword energy and power directly condensed into the clenched fist. The incredible destructive power condensed at one point and burst out completely. The domain of the invincible realm was ridiculous like a piece of paper. The space was completely broken. The fist did not stop at all, smashed all the desperate resistance of Wu Ju, and directly penetrated his chest. His heart was completely shattered under the huge force, and thick blood burst out directly on his back. Wu Ju opened his eyes wide in horror and stared straight ahead. There was nothing in front of him. There was no one. In front of the private plane, Zhong Yongming held the chain in his hand. As soon as he had the feeling of the dog chain in his mind, a bloody palm had reached over and taken the chain. Zhong Yongming stared blankly and couldn't react for a while. Li Tianlan led the dog, expressionless, turned around and walked up the gangway without saying a word. The gangway was closed in the night. Night fell completely. The hatch was closed. The captain of the private plane was already waiting to take off. Zhong Yongming's face became gloomy little by little. He gritted his teeth tightly. For a moment, great humiliation filled his chest, and he couldn't say a word. Gu Xianyan, who was staring at this scene, finally laughed. Her face was very young, but with a touch of beauty that could topple a country. It's a worthwhile trip. Satisfied, she sighed and said softly. Chapter 920. When the cabin door was closed, the sound of breaking and the loud noise of the crowd finally came. Zhong Yongming, whose face was red, was stiff and trembling. The other directors, including the mayor of Huading, all looked at each other. Everyone had a blank look on their faces. Even the two experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm in Kunlun City behind Gu Xianyan were confused. What's wrong? Someone suddenly asked the question in everyone's mind. They did see the young emperor of Emperor Dong's palace just now. In a short time, he walked down the gangway step by step. Everyone was looking at him. It was a matter of a moment. His feet landed on the ground and he took a step forward. Then he turned around and walked back. The cabin door was closed. What's going on? The deputy speaker from the Prince Group muttered to himself blankly and then became a little angry. Didn't they say they were going to find an invincible realm killer? He came, showed his face, and left without even saying a word. He subconsciously glanced at Zhong Yongming. Then he glanced at Zhou Yu, the mayor of Huading. Zhou Yu's expression was calm and indifferent, even with a hint of a smile. Born in the North Group, he could rise from the deputy speaker of Northern City to the mayor of Huading, which was definitely an exceptional promotion. Huading's status in Zhongzhou state was too special. The position of mayor had always been more valuable than the position of governor of other provinces, more attractive than even the speaker of some backward provinces, and more important than the deputy speaker of Northern City. Coming from the North Group, he could become the mayor of Huading, which was one of the most successful operations of the North Group, closely following the academics and the Prince Group, in the past 2 years. And many people knew very well that Zhou Yu had a close relationship with Han Donglu, the military counselor of Emperor Dong's palace. Now the rumors of the new group were buzzing. When the new group officially appeared, Zhou Yu would inevitably be the backbone of it. This was not an ordinary change. Because everyone knew Zhou Yu's position in the North Group. He was Zhou Yunhai's nephew. To be more precise, if there was no new group, Zhou Yu would be the future successor of the North Group. His entering the new group meant too many things. Zhou Yu's attitude was very proper, without any resentment of being ignored. There was even a little smile in his eyes. He glanced at Zhong Yongming with a playful look. Zhong Yongming gritted his teeth. His extreme anger was mixed with some doubts. He didn't know what Li Tianlan was doing. He was very sure that he had held the golden retriever's chain. So, did Li Tianlan fly all the way here to let her admire his golden retriever instead of looking for trouble? Or did he want him to taste the dog leash? He only showed it to her. So stingy. As his imagination ran wild, he became more and more resentful, and he couldn't help but take a step forward. The sudden voice from the walkie-talkie caused everyone to freeze in place once again. Reporting, the target has been spotted at Gate 9 of the airport lobby. Target spotted, Zhong Yongming hesitated for a moment before picking up the walkie-talkie. What target? The person on the other end of the walkie-talkie suddenly fell into silence, as if surprised by the stupidity of the question. After a pause of 2 seconds, the man said carefully, "Report, the target has been confirmed to be Invincible Realm Killer Ju. The target has been confirmed dead." A clear voice came from the walkie-talkie to the ears of the 13 directors. Zhong Yongming was stunned and stared at the walkie-talkie in his hand in disbelief. "What? Confirmed dead," he muttered to himself and suddenly reacted. He shouted, "How did he die?" His heart was pierced by a punch, and the power shattered the target's internal organs. The killing intent seemed to come from outside the airport lobby, because the moment the huge power appeared, it directly shattered the glass wall of the lobby. The specific cause of death needs to be studied." The voice on the other end of the walkie-talkie finally became a little hesitant. He was an expert arranged by the Huading Parliament to stay in the airport lobby. Although he was far from the invincible realm, the strength of the thunder-shocking realm also meant that he had a good eye. But now such an old general couldn't determine the cause of death of Ju. What was going on? It was a mess. It was inexplicable. It was too fake. It was impossible. Messy thoughts popped up in his mind. 1 second, Zhong Yongming's body suddenly stiffened. He tried to recall the scene in that instant. He caught the dog leash that looked ordinary. The golden retriever raised its head and glanced at him innocently. The moment he looked down at the golden retriever's eyes, he saw a palm covered with blood. The palm took the chain from his hand and walked up the gangway silently. So, was it that second just now? In that second, Li Tianlan loosened the iron chain and directly appeared in the airport hall a kilometer away. He smashed the huge glass wall and found a dead end in an instant. He smashed the man's heart with a punch, and then appeared in front of the plane and took over the iron chain. Ju, dead? Was he really dead? Just for a second? Unarmed, a distance of thousands of meters, tens of thousands of tourists, instantly locked on and killed with one blow? Zhong Yongming's anger disappeared without a trace in an instant. An inexplicable chill enveloped him. He only felt that the world was extremely illusory, and everything just now seemed to be an illusion. How was it possible? Why was it like this? He stood in front of the plane, looked up at the cold fuselage, and thought in a trance. How was it possible? Why was it like this? In the lobby of the cabin, blood flowed along the flat floor. He lay there quietly, and the warm wind in the lobby seemed to pour into his chest with an extremely cold temperature. The dazzling light from the ceiling sprinkled down. The panicked roar of the crowd continued to echo. Someone approached and seemed to be saying something. The voice was extremely vague and could not be heard clearly at all. He lay there quietly. He knew that he was dead. But the strong vitality of an invincible realm expert still allowed him to retain a trace of consciousness. He was not sure what had happened. In the blink of an eye, the dense sword intent instantly poured into the lobby and enveloped everyone in the entire airport. The moment the sword energy touched his domain of the invincible realm, his whole body had been completely locked. It was too late to get up and escape. The majestic power surged over from afar in an instant. His domain, his body, his concealment, and everything he was proud of became a joke in the face of the majestic power. Li Tianlan personally took action. The fist smashed all his resistance in an instant. The amazing power in the distance had condensed to one point the moment it pierced his chest, and all of it burst out completely in his chest. His internal organs, all the joints of his body, countless muscles, blood vessels, and even his skin were completely broken under the tremendous power. The sound of the glass wall breaking was so shocking. But the real murder was silent. The killing that crossed a kilometer was quiet and did not even affect anyone nearby. The power of the punch was condensed to the limit and directly acted on him. The seat under him didn't even change. It was Li Tianlan, insta-kill. Dong Huang. Dark world. He was really going to die. The light in his sight became dimmer and dimmer. The last vitality slowly disappeared, and his consciousness began to sink. He wanted to clench his fist. In his remaining consciousness, fear and resentment had disappeared. Only unwillingness was left. He was the only invincible realm killer in the dark world today. He had established his own force and had a very good start. In the future, he should stand at the peak of the new era of the dark world and make everyone live in fear and shadow. He still had a lot of things to do, and a lot of plans to implement. Since he became an invincible realm expert, he had not even really assassinated a powerful figure. But now, he was dead. He was insta-killed by a punch. The strength of the invincible realm had become a joke. Why was it like this? He tried to open his mouth, but the light in front of him was getting dimmer, and finally turned into complete darkness. In front of the plane, everyone was still immersed in the shock of Ju's sudden death. The huge shock made everyone unable to organize their words for a while. So they froze in place, like statues. The night became dark. The lights of the airport began to shine. Zhong Yongming finally took another step forward. But all the anger had been completely restrained by him. His tone was calm, but there was an obvious concession. "Your Highness, if possible, I want to talk to you." His voice was not high. But for people like Li Tianlan who were almost inhuman, no matter how low the voice was, as long as he wanted to hear it, he could always hear it. There was silence in the plane. The captain patiently waited for the airport to arrange the route and prepare to return. There seemed to be someone inside reporting something, but it seemed that nothing was reported. 2 minutes later, the cabin door opened again. The gangway fell down. A slim young woman who looked quiet and sweet appeared in front of the cabin door. Every council member of Huading knew this young woman. She was Han Xinyan, the daughter of Han Donglu. She was also the current chief secretary of Emperor Dong's palace. Zhong Yongming thought that he was not disgraced. He breathed a sigh of relief and subconsciously stepped forward. The next second, his footsteps froze. Han Xinyan's voice sounded when he stepped forward. "Mayor Zhou, His Majesty wants to see you." Zhong Yongming stepped forward with one foot, and the other foot stayed there. He was extremely embarrassed. What made him most embarrassed was that Han Xinyan did not look at him from beginning to end. She looked at Zhou Yu with a gentle smile. Zhou Yu seemed to be a little surprised. But he was more surprised. Among the 13 council members, a deputy mayor who was closer to him was also surprised. Zhou Yu took a deep breath, nodded with a smile, and walked up the gangway without looking at Zhong Yongming. Zhong Yongming's face had turned black. His voice instantly became louder. "Secretary Han." His voice was slow and dignified, with an indescribable power in the night sky. "I also have something to talk to Your Highness." He had always insisted on calling her Your Highness, and it was a little rude to make such a request at this time. The other council members came to their senses and looked at Zhong Yongming in surprise. The council members who were still immersed in the despair of death had only one thought at this time. Does the chairman want to die? Zhou Yu had already walked up the gangway. At the cabin door, Han Xinyan glanced at Zhong Yongming with no expression and said lightly, "His Majesty said he doesn't want to talk to you." "Mr. Chairman, please behave yourself." Chapter 921. The interior of the private plane was spacious, but it was not extravagant and luxurious. Every detail was exquisite and comfortable. Zhou Yu walked into the cabin door. Led by Han Xinyan, he passed the rest area and was finally taken to the brightly lit reception area. Soft leather sofas were arranged regularly, and the carpet was as soft as cotton. Soft music was playing in the reception area, and a fruit plate was placed on the crystal tea table in the center of the sofa. When Zhou Yu walked in, Li Tianlan, who was a little pale, was pouring water into the teapot. It was just a simple act of pouring water. He put the tea leaves in the teapot and poured hot water into it. After a while, he poured the water into the cup. There was no technical content at all. But the tea leaves were good, or very good. So as the hot water was poured in, the fragrance of the tea quickly spread. Li Tianlan, who was pale, seemed to feel the footsteps. He raised his head and stood up with a smile. Zhou Yu subconsciously quickened his pace. He passed Han Xinyan and took the initiative to stretch out his hands to Li Tianlan. Your Majesty. Li Tianlan reached out his hand and shook it tightly with him. He patted him with the other hand and smiled apologetically. Mayor Zhou, I'm sorry. I thought I was still in Northern City. I just came out of the desert and was so busy. If Xinyan hadn't reminded me just now, I'm afraid we would have missed this meeting. This explanation was detailed and sincere, full of sincerity. Zhou Yu was obviously a little excited. He shook his head harder and said with a smile, Your Majesty, you don't have to say that. I can totally understand. Emperor Dong's palace and Xianyuan City have been developing very well recently. But there are many things that need Your Majesty to worry about. I'm honored that Your Majesty remembers me. Li Tianlan shook his head with a smile. We're all on the same side. Don't stand on ceremony. Please sit down, Mayor Zhou. Your Majesty, you can just call me by my name. I'm older than you. If you don't mind, you can call me Old Zhou. Zhou Yu sat down with a smile. Han Xinyan, who was bending over to pour tea, trembled slightly and the tea almost spilled out. Old Zhou. This form of address was so novel that even Zhou Yu would find it strange if he were to say it himself. At the age of 42, he was one of the youngest governor-general officials in Zhongzhou State. Only Zhou Yuanshan, Wang Jingxin and a few others could be on par with him. With this position and his age, it was not appropriate to say that he was in the prime of his life. He could be said to be young and promising. It was estimated that Zhou Yu had never heard such a title like Old Zhou since he entered the official career. It doesn't matter how I address you. Li Tianlan smiled casually and handed a cigarette to Zhou Yu. No matter what you call me, Brother Zhou is someone I respect. I really hope that Emperor Dong's palace can have more pillars like Brother Zhou, but it seems to be a bit whimsical. These words were undoubtedly flattering to Zhou Yu. But what Zhou Yu cared about and was most excited about was Li Tianlan's description. Pillar. This meaning was clear and unambiguous. What it meant couldn't be more obvious. He took the cigarette, lit it, took a deep breath, and said with a smile, speaking of pillars, His Majesty is the biggest one in Emperor Dong's palace. In all aspects, only with His Majesty can we have space to play and enough motivation. Han Xinyan took 2 steps back and watched the conversation curiously. Qin Weibai said that she was now qualified for the job of Chief Financial Officer of Emperor Dong's palace. In terms of professional ability, she had no problem. But in the end, she was just a young woman 1 year older than Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was very young, but his personal strength and the support behind him were enough to support him to stand at the highest peak and enjoy the scenery. But Han Xinyan didn't think she was qualified. She still had too much to learn. It was easy to be a secretary, but it was extremely difficult to be Emperor Dong's secretary. So she was learning and improving herself all the time. Zhou Yu was undoubtedly a person worth learning from. Li Tianlan observed Li Tianlan's words and actions. He saw Li Tianlan say mushy words in the most normal, natural, and completely sincere manner, and put on a humble posture. He naturally flattered Li Tianlan and changed the topic from a member of Emperor Dong's palace to a member of Emperor Dong's palace. He expressed his loyalty straightforwardly but not abruptly at all. Although the conversation had just begun, both sides seemed to have received satisfactory answers. Han Xinyan stood aside, deep in thought. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment with a cigarette between his fingers. Then he said slowly, Of course, in some ways, Brother Zhou and I are completely one. Our advance and retreat is one of the most important things for Emperor Dong's palace. We will do our best to help you, give you more support, and give you more room to play. This is also the purpose of my conversation with you this time. In fact, after the funeral, military counselor suggested that I meet you. But there are still many things in Emperor Dong's palace that haven't been straightened out. I don't have a specific and detailed plan, so I naturally can't give Brother Zhou a specific promise. So I want to postpone the meeting. What does Your Majesty need me to do? There was a slight smile at the corner of Zhou Yu's mouth. Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace would give him the greatest support, which naturally meant that he had to do something. Military Counselor's Flourishing Age Fund had been developing in Zhongzhou State for many years and had countless tentacles. Money could bring benefits, and the unimaginable amount of money brought an unbreakable covenant. For the North Group, Military Counselor was almost completely tied to them. Zhou Yu was like this. Zhou Yunhai, the current member of the Parliament of Zhongzhou State and the leader of the North Group, was like this. Xia Qiuling, the only member of Parliament in the North Group, was also like this. The core framework of the establishment of the new group should be composed of Wu Jingmin and Bai Qingqian. Then some of the remaining forces of the Li family would come closer. And then, part of the forces of the giant group and nearly half of the forces of the North Group would automatically become the core of the new group. In this way, the lineup of the new group was already very terrifying. But after the emergence of the new group, if the support of the giant group and the North Group was excluded, when the honeymoon period with the Southeast Group was over, the power of the new group still seemed a little immature among the several old groups. Li Tianlan would give them support, but not too much. It was not that he didn't want to, but he couldn't care less. He wanted to establish a new group to gain support, not simply to support others. So many things needed to be fought for by himself. Zhou Yu was very clear about this. And from the North Group to the new group, it was not a matter of a word or a statement. He also needed to do something to prove his position and consolidate his position in the new group. Li Tianlan glanced at him with a chuckle and asked, I heard that Zhong Yongming has a strong desire for control. Is he also strict about some things in Huading's municipal government? Zhou Yu's eyes flashed and he said with a faint smile, the speaker does care about the work of the municipal government, but he doesn't intervene in specific things, especially sensitive ones. From another perspective, this sentence also seemed to indicate that Zhong Yongming couldn't intervene in some of the work of the municipal government, especially the sensitive things. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and glanced at Zhou Yu. Zhou Yu was the mayor, and Zhong Yongming was the speaker. Although Zhong Yongming was one level higher in rank as a member of parliament, in fact, in Huading's system, the mayor could not be regarded as the speaker's subordinate, but the speaker's partner. Although Zhou Yu's rank was one level lower, he was the successor of the North Group, which was enough to make up for some of his disadvantages in rank, so he had the conditions to be a strong mayor. The only thing he lacked was some support. Li Tianlan thought of some secret deployments in Huading, gently tapped the teacup, and said with a smile, Brother Zhou, I haven't met Minister Yunhai yet, but I think he has more expectations for me. So does Emperor Dong's palace. The pillar of Emperor Dong's palace should be someone who can control the overall situation. I can't give him a long-term plan, but at least I can set a short-term goal. He paused and smiled, Huading is beautiful, I like it very much. Zhou Yu's eyes became extremely hot in an instant. He smiled gently and nodded, I see. Through the cabin window, he looked at the brilliant lights outside the airport. After a moment of silence, he said softly, I like it here very much, too. Li Tianlan nodded, I'll go to Yuzhou as soon as I finish some things in Tiannan. If possible, I'll give you some support. Zhou Yu's heart suddenly jumped. He took a deep breath and said yes. Joining the new group was not only because the binding of interests between them and military counselor had become unbreakable, but also from the perspective of the North Group, the new group had a promising future. Not to mention that Zhou Yunhai had more expectations for him, even Zhou Yu himself had more expectations for himself. He was already the mayor of Huading. Further, a senator. Further, a director. In recent years, the declining North Group could barely maintain a director's position. And its ranking was getting lower and lower. But the new group was different. The combination of Wu Jingmin and Bai Qingqian had stabilized the framework of the new group. 5 years later, Zhou Yuanshan of Jiangzhe had the qualification to soar. Whether it was the new group or the giant group, Zhou Yuanshan would be the #1 figure in Zhongzhou State that they would promote. Maybe 10 years later, maybe 15 years later. At that time, Emperor Dong's palace would be unparalleled, and it was almost impossible for Zhou Yuanshan to encounter any strong competitors. Although Zhou Yu was a few years older than Zhou Yuanshan, to put it more exaggeratedly, even after 20 years, he was still relatively young and vigorous in his current level. He could completely keep up with Zhou Yuanshan's pace. As long as he could get the approval of Emperor Dong's palace, when Zhou Yuanshan took over, there would inevitably be a position for him among the directors around him. And it would be a position of absolute power. Now the opportunity was in front of him. If he could settle Zhong Yongming in Huading and satisfy Li Tianlan, then in the future, Li Tianlan would certainly satisfy him. At this moment, his thoughts were the same as Gu Xianyan outside the cabin. This trip was not in vain. Zhou Yu thought of the upcoming decisive battle in Beihai. He thought of a series of possible situations after the decisive battle. This was an opportunity for the new group to expand rapidly. It was also an opportunity for him. Zhou Yu made up his mind. He looked at Li Tianlan and said seriously, "Your Majesty, at the end of the year, I will invite Mayor Ning of Xianyuan City to Huading for an exchange." Li Tianlan's eyes lit up. Ning Qiancheng was the mayor of Xianyuan City. In Xianyuan City without a speaker, the mayor was the top leader, and the chief administrative officer in Xianyuan City was similar to the mayor of Huading. Normally, only the top leader of Huading could invite the top leader of Xianyuan City to Huading for an exchange. This completely showed Zhou Yu's confidence. Very good. He nodded and laughed. The phone suddenly rang. Han Xinyan picked up the phone, walked aside, and whispered, "Hello." Less than a minute after she left, she walked back quickly and stood beside Li Tianlan, a little hesitant. Zhou Yu subconsciously wanted to get up and leave. Li Tianlan waved his hand and said calmly, "There are no outsiders. Just say it." Han Xinyan hesitated a little, nodded, and whispered, "Your Majesty, there is news from the sanatorium in Yuzhou." She paused and whispered, "Li, she just woke up. She wants to meet you."